If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment for more videos like this. It's not the Wendigo or skinwalker that I'm afraid to encounter alone in the woods, but the two-legged, talking animal. Share your horror stories with creepy people encounters in the woods. My girlfriend and I arrive at a remote stretch of forest around dusk. We saw two strange-looking men sitting on some rocks but didn't think much about it. We drove about 2 to 3 miles further into the forest and set up camp. 30 to 45 minutes later, it was dark at this point. One of the two guys walked up to our camp and yelled hello. I responded, and he asked to walk through our camp. I asked him why, and he said he needed to reach the other side of the creek. He walked around our car, and once he saw my girlfriend, he stopped and asked some strange questions. He crossed the creek, walked into some bushes, and turned off his light. I stood at the bank of the creek watching him, and he just stared back at me for around 5 minutes. He eventually walked away. We threw everything in the car and left. Also, there was nothing on the side of the creek he crossed. No campsite, no trails, nothing. Weird behavior. I didn't think much about it until he turned off his light and stood in the bushes. Also, where was the second guy? There were no other campers at this stretch of forest, and we didn't see any vehicles. We were at the very last campsite on that road. There was nothing past us. 16 at the time. Was walking just outside the woods in what I thought was a safe area. I had one earbud in. When I walk at night, I always make sure to be aware of my surroundings. It was about 3 in the morning. I heard someone catcall me from inside the woods. I glanced around to see no one. I kept walking until I heard someone shout out, "Hey you, get the duck back here." I turn around just as 3 large men, probably late 30s early 40s, emerged from the woods. I instantly burst into a run, and I don't think I ever ran that fast. They began chasing me and telling me they just wanted to show me something in the woods. I screamed back that I carried knives on me, and I wasn't hesitant on killing them if they touched me. I think I had 3 different knives on my person since I never walk in the dark without at least one. They seemed to slow down but still were in pursuit. I ran faster than I have ever run before. I was nearing my house, so I hopped into my neighbor's backyard before hopping into my own and going in through the back door. I locked every window and door, called the police, and began to cry heroically. Police show up, take my statement, and then I cry myself to bed. This is the exact reason I refuse to let myself or anyone I care about walk alone at night, and also why I will never walk alongside a forest again. So way back in 2016, when the whole killer clown epidemic was huge, I was walking through the woods at around 10 p.m. alone in order to get to a party/gathering that was happening in a secluded part of the forest. It was almost pitch black, and I could barely see in front of me besides the flash on my phone, and everything seemed normal as I was walking to the party. I got to a long stretch of woods with no defined path, but it was the quickest way to the party, so I took it. As I got around midway through, I heard something to my left. I turned and saw a shadowy figure sitting on a fallen log. I was understandably unnerved, but I couldn't make out if it was just shadows from the moonlight or if it was an actual person. I made the mistake of shining my phone light directly at it, and I was instantly terrified. Sat there, alone in the middle of the woods, was a largish man dressed as a clown with full face paint and sporting the creepiest smile imaginable. I tried to call 5 different people as I was passing him, and then I heard him get up behind me. I instantly started sprinting towards the end of the long stretch onto a path that had a barbed wire fence down the side of it. During the sprint I was pretending to be on the phone with one of my friends, and I could hear him running after me, but there was no chance in hell that I would be turning around to see if I was right. When I got to the path, I jumped over the fence as fast as I could and sliced my hands open as I did so. I then turned around and kept running backwards as I saw the clown, who stood behind the fence just staring at me and smiling. I didn't stop running until I got to the party, and I was scared for a very long time after this. You have to bear in mind that there were so many rumors of people being ended by people dressed as clowns at the time, and while I will never know if the man had evil intentions or was just trying to scare me, it was extremely strange and scary to live through. My friend and I were walking home from school one day. We took a different path than usual, and we stumbled upon someone's house. It was one of those isolated homes, surrounded by forest on all sides. I noticed something white on the edge of the lawn as we passed. I look at it, and it looked like half a human pelvis. I asked my friend, who hunted, what he thought, and he said it didn't look like a deer or coyote. As we were studying it, the homeowner storms out of his house and starts to chase us. And I mean, really chase us. For a good half mile or so, until we lost him. It was more than just trying to chase us away, I think he was trying to get us. We never told anyone at the time. I tell the story now, over a decade later, and people think I'm bullshitting. I just hope my friend was wrong, and the guy was just a ducking loon with animal bones on his lawn. I was camping in the middle of nowhere in Washington, near Mount Reiner. It was not an official campground, but rather a remote area deep in the forest where I wouldn't have expected to see another human being for miles. One night I wake up and hear something, open my tent, and there is a guy sitting by where my fire had been right outside my tent. Nothing particularly noteworthy about the guy, just a fairly regular looking dude just sitting there a couple feet from my tent. No bag or pack or anything with him, just a guy. He saw me open the tent, his eyes got huge, like he had just seen a ghost, and he took off. It shook me up pretty badly, but over the next day I managed to put it out of my mind fairly well after writing it off as just some odd occurrence and a guy that was probably high or something and had somehow managed to set up a camp coincidentally not far from mine. 2 days later, while I was sitting by the fire that night, I began to hear noises that I became increasingly convinced were human voices. I called out to them, and out of the darkness, someone was like, "Do you know how to get to Bell's Canyon?" I said no. I don't even think that's a real place there. They kept talking from just out of my line of vision. I tried to see them with my flashlight, but they yelled, "Aim that away," and, kind of spooked and not wanting to piss off a potentially crazy person, I did. After like 15 minutes of me being very freaked out and them talking and asking completely random questions from the darkness, it sounded like the voice had gotten closer, so I shined my light that way again, and it was the same dude who had been outside my tent 2 nights before. He had to have followed me almost 15 miles over 2 days because there is no way he could have just accidentally wound up in the same spot as vast as that wilderness is. No possible way. As soon as my light hit him, he took off again. I started to chase him but didn't want to get lost in the wilderness in the dark, so I stopped quickly after probably only 100 to 200 feet. This one couldn't be written off, because the only way he could have been in both places is specifically if he was following me. I decided the trip was very over first thing in the morning and hiked back out over 3 days, constantly doubling back, trying to throw anyone following off my trail, and occasionally hiding and waiting to see if he would come by following me. I really can't describe how terrifying it was to feel like I was being hunted through the woods and to actually have to brainstorm on things I could do to best avoid potentially being murdered. On the first night of hiking out, twice I heard what sounded like a person walking circles outside my tent, but by the time I mustered the courage to look, nobody was there. On the second night I heard what I thought was an animal making noises at first in the distance but slowly decided sounded more like a human making animal calls, but could have actually been an animal, but I didn't actually see the guy again. But it really sounded like a person making howling noises. I literally almost cried when I finally got back to the car. The relief was so strong. To this day, probably the most terrifying experience I've ever had. I have no idea who the guy was or what his intentions were and no way of getting an explanation, but I really can't articulate just what a terrifying few days it was. I was walking my dog in the woods. It was pouring rain, so there weren't any other dog walkers. After a while, I noticed that my dog, a shepherd mix, was acting strange. She was circling me protectively, staying low to the ground, ears back, and growing occasionally. So naturally, I started looking around for a cause of this behavior. That's when I noticed I was being followed by a guy in a hood. He didn't have a dog with him, so he had no reason to be out in the middle of the woods in the pouring rain. Bear in mind that I am a 5'3", 19-year-old girl, and being pursued by an unfamiliar man in the middle of nowhere was a terrifying experience for me. I started walking faster and took a few turns, and after a while I thought I'd lost him. My dog had calmed down and wandered into the woods out of sight. Suddenly the guy appeared out of one of the off-braining trails and came right at me. Luna, my dog, came barreling out of the woods at top speed and grabbed the guy by the arm. I swear, I've never seen her bite anyone. The guy screamed, and Luna let go and came back to me. The dude ran off. I'm still surprised Luna didn't chase after him. It took me a while to calm both me and Luna down. After that, we went home. I was camping in Shenandoah National Park, not at a shelter or off the ad, but in the backcountry a couple of miles from Skyline Drive. The dog tends to growl at every twig snap or woodland creature she thinks she hears. Around 11:30 or so, she abruptly stands up, crawls out of the sleeping bag, looks at the wall of the tent, then crawls back into the sleeping bag. About a minute later, a flashlight abruptly turns on and is pointed at my tent. I hadn't heard anyone walk up, no mean feat as this was in the late fall after all the leaves had fallen off, and I got out my pocket knife to prepare for my role in a slasher flick. Light turns off, and straining, I tried to hear if the individual was walking off or not, but I never did. A few more times during the night, the dog crawled out and repeated her stare into the night, retreat bit, but the flashlight didn't return. What's creepy about this is that she went with whoa. I'm going to be quiet about this. When she's growled at bears that have been near our tent before. I'd initially thought that it might have been a park ranger, but if the dog detected the same individual multiple times, I'm now assuming poacher. Or an axe murderer. There is a hiking trail close to the school I go to. It's about 2 miles to the top with a beautiful view over the entire valley. My friends and I went up one Saturday. The sun was beginning to set right as we started the 2-mile walk down. Terrible timing, but we know the trail. Everything is good, creepy though, because it's getting dark and I'm paranoid about being with it. I'm not really paying attention, but I hear my friend say, "What's that?" I don't have good eyesight, so I looked but didn't see anything. "It's a girl," my guy friend said. I was freaked. It's 9 o'clock on a hiking trail that not a single other person is on. As we get closer, I see that she's sitting on the ground in a pile of leaves with her knees to her chest. She's rocking back and forth in only a pink nightgown. It's February. My friends and I chalk it up to someone being on a terrible trip in the woods, feeling bad since that happened to my friend once. We debated asking if she needed help. That was until my friend saw that she was cradling a knife in her lap. Duck that I thought I was out of here. More freaked out, we pick up our pace but still think the girl could just be tripping. We start joking, saying it must be a terrible trip in the woods at night to try and calm ourselves down. Then we see a man running frantically up the trail, asking if we've seen his daughter. This girl was about 20, not a little girl, although she was dressed like one. We say no, we haven't seen her, because we were freaked out thinking we just saw a girl who escaped a kidnapper. As you can guess, we ran the rest of the way. Unfortunately, where we parked, there wasn't a single other car to call and give a license plate number, but we did call and report what we saw. They searched, but we never heard an update. I don't know what happened in those woods, and I'm not sure if I ever want to. So it was a beautiful Friday, and I was still somewhat fresh into my relationship with the love of my life. I had a week earlier decided to finally quit the nasty drugs in my life and had made it one whole week without using. How did my addicted mind know how to celebrate? Of course, grab a bag of heroin. We were spending the day hiking through beautiful wooded areas. What I didn't predict was how far down my tolerance had gone. I was getting progressively naughty but wrote it off to my girl as being sick. As the night began to wind down, we decided to get a fire going on this very remote hilltop way out in the sticks to watch the stars. While we are chilling there, we notice a truck pull up, and while we were a little curious, it wasn't like it's private land or anything. We continued talking and cuddling up next to our fire, thinking maybe just some kids getting high or whatever. Next thing I know, I see this man appear out of the dark on the path. He's walking along, looking like maybe he's going to a lookout area to watch stars. As he passes, I greet him with, "Hey, how is it going?" The guy literally just stares at us without saying a word in return and walks past. The look on his face was borderline evil, no expression. Very odd, but I'm a tough guy, so duck it. He walks past a bit later, it's a one-way in and out deal, and gets into his truck to drive off. Or so we thought. Now remember, I'm fated as duck, and the nods are getting me bad at this point. I'm going in and out of some dream world and was speaking out loud what I was experiencing in said dream world. AKA very high. My girl starts to hear something rustling around in the trees and tries to alert me, but I'm too faded at first to get what she's saying. But eventually she gets my attention, and soon as I heard it too, my adrenaline made me go from dopey to high alert. I grew up in the woods. I know how animals act and how they move. This clearly wasn't an animal. It was making too much noise, and when I tried to yell to scare it off, it would stop moving for a second. It felt like it was getting closer and closer, to the point where I grabbed a big log and began screaming at the woods, "Come on out, I know you're in there." As I said that, whoever ran wildly, crashing through branches as they went. We decided at that point it's best to get the duck out of there, packed up, and walked out log in hand for protection. What we saw as we went out still freaks me out. We saw that guy pulling down the road a ways into some trees. That creepy man tried to hide his truck to come stalk us, and he was still out there. Needless to say, I was beyond freaked at this point, ran our asses out of there, and didn't feel safe until we got home. I really hope he was just thinking he'd get a peek of some potential action, but with how far out we were, anything could have happened. This was a major wake-up call for me. I was incapacitated and unable to protect to the fullest the love of my life. From there out, I had a few relapses, but that was the beginning of the end. For reference, I haven't touched dope in over a decade. This story happened when I was 17. To my 4 friends and me, we were all 16 to 17 years old at the time. My friends and I loved going to waterfalls, beaches, etc. We were always finding new places to go and spend our summer days at. One day, we found a waterfall online that looked cool. Some people from our school went and posted pictures. It looked like it would be fun, as there was a bit of a hike to it. My friends and I packed up the car one afternoon and started the couple-hour drive to the site. Once we arrived, we unpacked the car and began our hike to the waterfall. I noticed when we got there that there was one other vehicle parked. I didn't give this too much thought at the time, but I found it important enough to note it in the back of my mind. For reference, it was a bit of a walk through the forest before reaching the waterfall, then you had to scale down a rock wall with a rope to get to the base of it. Once we made it to the base of the waterfall, we saw a tall, skinny, and kind of creepy looking man hanging out on a rock not too far from where we had just climbed down. He looked to be around 50 years old. He gave us a weird look but left right when he noticed us. After he left, we quickly forgot about him and went on to enjoy our afternoon. We were sitting in our bathing suits in a pool of water that had gathered from the waterfall. We were having a good time being the only ones down there, until a couple came down. The couple were in their mid-30s to early 40s. The man was respectfully huge, he looked like he could lift a crazy amount of weight. Both of us and them kept to ourselves for a while. That was until the man called one of us over. I got up and went to see what he wanted. I took a couple steps to get closer to them to see what they wanted. He asked if we knew the man at the top of the waterfall. To which I replied, "No, what man are you?" And right then the man from the couple took off, booking it to the wall to climb back up to the top of the waterfall. I had no idea what was going on, and at this point my friends got up to see what was going on. The woman said, "That man was up there taking pictures of you guys and doing some inappropriate things. We have a daughter at home, so he'd be very protective." At that point, my heart dropped. We thanked the lady and instantly started to pack up our stuff. The man came back to tell us he couldn't find the weird guy, he must have run off. All of us were extremely uncomfortable and unsettled and started to walk back to the car. On our walk back, when we were near the area for parking, I saw the man standing behind a tree. That was when my friends and I absolutely booked it to the car. We luckily made it home without being followed or having anything else weird happen. I'm 23 now, and this experience still makes me feel unsettled. I have no idea what would have happened to us if that couple hadn't come. I grew up in a very emotionally and abusive home. I never had anything but negativity spoken to me. And as a child, I believed it. My self-esteem was rock bottom, and I believed that I was no good and that everyone hated me, as I was being told. I became a very shy, withdrawn person who really made little effort with friendships. I held everyone at arm's length but was desperate for any small scraps of positive attention. I found this positivity in a wonderful young couple who came into our church to be youth leaders. I was bullied terribly by the kids at my church and hated going until this couple came there. They were young, sweet, and kind and went out of their way to be especially nice to me. They arranged a picnic and hike at a nearby state park for one Saturday. I was around 11 at this point, and ordinarily, I wouldn't participate in these outings, but since they'd both be there, I was excited to go. We met at the church and all got on the bus. I heard a few whispered comments about "Why is she here?" and about my clothes. I ignored them and sat by myself in the back of the bus. We got there, and I mostly hung out with the couple, who I'll call S for the husband and C for the wife. We had a big cookout near the lake and afterwards went for a hike. There were quite a few kids there, so S and C had their hands full on the hike, keeping everyone on the trail. I, of course, was at the rear of the line. The kids I was behind started making fun of me and telling me I was too lazy to make the hike, and no one wanted me there anyway. Then they ran ahead, laughing. I slowed down till they got out of sight, then I sat on a rock, crying. In a minute or two, I heard someone speak to me. I looked up, wiping my eyes, and there was a man standing by me. I hadn't heard anyone walk up the trail. I stood, and he asked if I was okay. I nodded yes, then he told me I looked sad and asked me to talk to him. I opened up to him and told him why I was there and that the other kids didn't like or want me there. He asked my name, where I was from, and how old I was, and I, being a dumb 11-year-old kid, told him. He was probably in his mid-20s with blonde hair and was cute. I was thrilled he was being kind to me. He gave me a hug and said that he and I could hang out and he'd take me back to my group once they came back down off the hike. He took my hand and told me we'd go hiking a trail he knew. I agreed. All of a sudden, I hear S yell my name and tell me to stop and to get away from that man. He came running up and got in between me and the guy and started asking him what he thinks he's doing. The guy just shrugged and started walking away through the trees, not on the trail. S asked me if I was okay or if the guy hurt me. I could tell S was very angry, so I teared up again because I thought I was in trouble. S squatted down in front of me and told me I wasn't in trouble and that I'd done nothing wrong. I told him we'd just talked a little and he was going to show me another trail to hike. S nodded and told me we'd just catch up to the others. He pulled C to the side once we caught up and they talked quietly, then she motioned for me to come over to her. She put her arm around me, and we sat on a rock, talked, and laughed. She had me walk beside her on the way back down and sit with her on the bus. The two of them made the rest of the day nice for me. It took me years to realize what could have happened to me that day and why S was so angry. Obviously, once S and C got to the stopping point on the trail, which was a stream with a sliding rock, they realized I was missing, and S came back down the trail looking for me. If he'd been a few seconds later, I would have been gone with that man, and God only knows what his plan was once he got me out of sight. My poor guardian angel did her job that day. I have no clue if they reported this encounter to the rangers or not. I hope they did. I was camping in a valley by myself with no cell service. I stayed late on a trail and ran into a nice local dude as it was getting dark. He showed me a local camping spot close to the road and the river, but camouflaged. I had a fire, drank beer, and listened to my friend's comedy podcast. I was loud and visible. Because it was dark already, I decided to sleep in the back of my truck under my topper next to all of my gear as opposed to setting up my tent. The next morning I made a fire, cracked a beer, and started making breakfast. Then I noticed that there is a man at the edge of my camp. He comes closer, but never looks directly at me. This dude looks homeless, has a long, ratty beard, and has at least 100 plastic grocery bags tied all over his clothes. I comment about how nice the day is. No response from him. I offer him breakfast, nothing. He sort of paces around the perimeter of my camp. I offer him a beer. But he just turns around. The dude is just standing there, back to me, wandering around. I'm realizing that there isn't going to be any good happenings. I had my bear spray and buck knife super close. I give him an ultimatum: Mother Ducker, you are either going to acknowledge me or leave immediately. He ignores me. I grab the bear mace and walk a few steps towards him. He sulked away, and I threw my shit in my truck and left that place right away. I wonder if he had watched me during the night, and I thank my laziness for staying in my truck instead of a tent. First off, I am living very rurally, in a small village with maybe 10 to 15 houses, but close to the highway. You can drive there within maybe 5 minutes, and also about 10 minutes away from the town. If you cross the street, it just takes you about 10 minutes to reach the forest. First Christmas Day. In the afternoon, my partner and I decided to go for a little digestive walk, as we were really stuffed from all the food. It was about 1700 hours and already dark when we left, and we had a big and bright LED flashlight with us. I also took my camera and my flash, as I love taking pictures of nature at night. We decided to walk on a little country road towards the forest and then turn right, following a small graveled cycle track close to the forest border, which connects our village and the next, maybe 15 to 20 minutes walk between villages. In the middle part of the track, you have to walk through a small bit of forest. It's rather dark, and the trees are very high and quite dense. When we entered, I saw our flashlight reflecting on something and recognized a car being parked there on the side of the track, close to the trees. This struck me as odd, as cars are not allowed to drive there and the path is very narrow and hidden, so I was a bit cautious. My partner pointed the light inside the car, and it seemed to be empty. I also noticed the windows were frozen, so it must have been parking there for a while. A bit in front of the car, I spotted a tree with an intriguing structure, and I asked my partner to point the flashlight towards it so I could focus better and photograph it with my flash. After I took a few images, my partner told me, there is someone standing behind us in the middle of the road, he is looking at us. Nobody was following us the whole way. I kept looking around and behind us occasionally, because at this time in the evening and close to the border of the forest there are boars sometimes, and it's mating season, so they are more aggressive than usual. Indeed, there was a man standing behind us, staying out of the flashlight's reach. He wasn't saying anything, just standing there and facing us. At first, I thought he might be startled, as it may seem a bit weird if someone's just taking photos around your car. It was not even legal to drive on that path with the car. I decided to get up and confront him from a distance, explaining to him that I was just taking photos of that tree. He didn't react and still just stood there. I then went on to ask him if he needed some light, and he replied that this wasn't necessary. It was odd, but I was still calm, sure about there being a normal explanation for his behavior. Nonetheless, my partner and I decided to just GTFO and follow the path leading to the next village. It was maybe 5 to 7 minutes until we reached it. I remembered the letters on his license plate, not the numbers though, unfortunately, and Googled it, and it turned out that he was from a city about 6 hours away from our village. Mind you, the country I live in is in a very strict lockdown right now, so you are only allowed to travel, even by car, if you have very urgent reasons. After we reached the first lantern of the next village, we looked back and observed the car driving a bit out of the forest, turning around, and going back inside. I was able to see that he parked there again and turned the lights off. He didn't leave the forest. We then went home on a much longer way than initially intended, as I didn't want to go back there for obvious reasons. Our flashlight battery died on the way and my phone battery was low, so I didn't want to call the police back then, but I called them as soon as I arrived home and gave them all the details. Big regret that I didn't memorize the whole license plate, but it was just so surprising that I seriously didn't think about it. Also, it only occurred to me as really strange when I thought about the frozen windows and that he could impossibly have walked behind us, plus him having no light and not responding. He did seem to be sneaking up on us when I sat down to take the photo. I think I was very lucky to have my partner, the camera, and the bright light with me. I don't want to imagine what could have happened if I was alone. One time I went hunting with my buddy. I decided to sleep inside my SUV as I can lay down in the back seat completely and sleep with a sleeping bag, and he slept outside with a tent. We had some beer and whiskey, ate well, and went to sleep, saying we would wake up at 5 a.m. I woke up to nature's call, but being cold and raining outside, I didn't want to get out of the car. So I slept in. Around 4 a.m., the car door opens. Sit in the driver's seat and turn on the car. I told my friend he can come in any time to turn on the car and heater because it's cold outside. I woke up and said, "Hey," but got no answer. But I had a weird feeling that I shouldn't look at him. So I went back to sleep. I woke up again at around 5 a.m. to a door opening, my friend getting in, turning the car on, and a heater. I said hey again, and he said hey. I finally woke up for good, and we got ready for hunting. Later that day, on the way back, he asked me if I was walking around the car to take a leak or something around 4 a.m. I said no, I stayed in the car until you came in. He said he heard someone keep walking around and the car door opening and closing, so he assumed I woke up already. So the person that got into my car at 4 a.m. and stayed in the driver's seat wasn't my friend. It was the most weird experience ever. I'm still weirded out by this one. I was archery elk hunting in Wyoming with my dad in thick, grizzly country. In the first couple days, we had multiple run-ins. We were sleeping in our Toyota Sequoia and on high alert the whole time. About day 4, we go after a herd we had been getting into. It got midday, and we head back to camp. We get to a spot where the Forest Service road stops, and there's a pristine early 80s Datsun 4x4 D720 King Cab with no plates. Being an old truck guy, I was shocked, so I kind of checked it out to see if there's some hunters that moved in on us or what. There was literally nothing in the cab or bed. I thought that was kind of odd. We hadn't seen anyone in days, and general season wasn't for another almost 2 weeks. The no license plate thing had me so confused. We're back at camp, and the truck comes down the road not far. We stop them to see if they're hunting or what's going on. It was a young white guy, 16 to 18 driving and his mom, who looked pretty native. They said they were going back to town, almost 2 hours on a rough-ass road, to get supplies then going up right where we were hunting to scout for his rifle tag. They come back through a few hours later, and we chat again. I glance around the truck. All I saw was whiskey, 2 empty backpacks, a small cooler, a frying pan, and a tent. No water, no bear spray, no gun, no sleeping bags, no clothes, no bear fence, nothing. We mentioned the bear active, and they brushed it off. "Oh, we cook meat and bacon all the time up here, we don't need protection, we never had an issue." They go up there, they absolutely screwed our hunt. We had bulls working perfect from upwind, and then I remember smelling campfire and the bulls going silent. After 3 days, I told my dad if they weren't gone before we left in 2 days, I was calling the Forest Service. Some ram hunters came through, and we chatted with them. One was a guide part-time in the unit but drew a ram tag. We talked about these 2 people, and I remember him saying, in reference to the bears, "It's not if, it's when up here." They did leave on the last day, but me and my dad still don't know what they were really doing. I thought for sure we were going to walk up on them dead. We had 2 different bears be very aggressive right in the zone they went. They really weren't far from their truck, maybe a mile, that had a camper top to sleep in. I think they were some Timothy Treadwell followers. Something weird was going on. I think they may have been from the Rees, but not sure why they'd hunted off it. I don't know. This isn't something that happened to me, but something that happened to my best friend. This happened only a few weeks ago. Here's a little background. My best friend walks her dog all the time on the trail. It's a trail in public park. It's popular, and a lot of people go there. She pulled into the parking lot and got her dog out of the car without an issue. As she was walking over to the trail, she noticed a man standing a little back in the woods staring at her. He was standing right by the entrance to the trail. She said he was a man in his mid-20s. She told me she thought he had a dog, and the dog was going to the bathroom. As she got closer, she realized he didn't have a dog. She was maybe 10 to 15 feet away from him, and he still stared at her. He didn't say one thing to hers. She felt uneasy and booked it back to her car. He followed her back to her car. She quickly got in and locked the doors. He started banging on her window. She couldn't make out much of what he said. She drove off and called the police. The police asked her if she spoke to the man and didn't seem to take it seriously at first. They finally said they would send somebody out to look. It scared the hell out of her. She went to a different trail to walk her dog. She hasn't seen him since, thank God. I hope he was caught because he could stalk another girl. Whoever the hell this creepy guy was, I hope you never meet my best friend ever again. I, a 23-year-old female, took my 2 dogs, a cane corso and a labradoodle, on a walk on a nature trail near my home. My car was the only car parked in the parking lot when I arrived, so no one else was on the trail. The trailhead only has one entrance, and the trail has thick forest on either side of it. My dogs and I started walking, and maybe 3/4 of a mile in, a man on a bike approached me from behind. I moved to side with my dogs to let him pass me, and when he does, my cane corso lunges toward him. I held her back, but that was unusual behavior for her. Around 5 minutes after the biker passed me, he passed me again, going the other way toward the exit, and again my dog lunged at him. I thought it was extremely odd that he decided to turn around so quickly since he couldn't have gone much more than a mile, which seems like a very short bike ride. He was dressed in biking gear and had a professional bike. It just seemed like he turned around very quickly after he saw me. I decided to stop and let my dogs rest, and I FaceTimed my boyfriend to tell him about my odd encounter. My boyfriend agreed to stay on the phone with me while I walked back because I felt unsafe. Then, my dogs and I turned around and started heading back to my car. About half a mile into our trip back, both of my dogs lunged at something inside the tree line off to the side of the trail. They barked and growled and tugged on their leashes towards the area of the tree line. I did not see anything there, but my dogs definitely sensed something. We moved on and made it to the parking lot, and I saw one other car there with that man's bike hanging on the bike rack on the trunk of the vehicle. Once I got closer to the car, I realized no one was inside. I have a bad feeling that man had very bad intentions. I think that he biked back to his car after seeing me, walked to that spot on the trail, and hid in the woods to do who knows what, then had second thoughts because I was on the phone with my boyfriends and I had 2 big dogs with me. It makes me sick thinking about it. I'm open to other explanations if anyone can think of one. I want this just to be an innocent encounter, just a misunderstanding on my part, but it feels sinister, and I feel like my dog sensed his energy from the start. This situation made me realize that walking alone on a rural trail, even with 2 big dogs, is not safe for me. I had just started walking the South Hills Conservation Area between Westgate and Brody with my dog this evening when I heard a biker approaching. The trail was splitting around a large tree anyway, so I went to the right side, leaving the left to the biker. The biker slowed down basically to a complete stop even though I wasn't in his way. He sort of gave me a head-to-toe scan, and I asked if he needed to pass on the other side. He said no and kept riding. At this point I registered a rather large blade in the side of a sack on the back of his bike. It stood out because it had a bright yellow handle. I immediately went on alert, as I am a young girl alone in the woods and had just seen a man with a blade. I kind of just stood there and listened, and less than 10 seconds pass, and I notice I can't hear the bike anymore. He had just gone around a turn and was out of sight, but I still was close enough that I would have heard a bike coasting. Then I start to hear footsteps coming back toward me and my dog. My dog is a large hunting breed and also went into high alert. The man steps around the corner and is holding the machete. My dog, who never barks unless there is a presumed threat, starts growling and barking, and I immediately start sprinting back to the trail entrance. Thankfully, we had driven over since the cement was too hot for his paws, so we hopped in the car and gunned it. The only rational argument I can come up with is that he is a frequent biker on the trail and brings a knife of some sort to trim trees. It's not the best maintained trail, so maybe people do that? Anyone else have any idea what could have been happening? I don't want to jump to the conclusion that he was out to hurt me, but I felt unsettled, and clearly my dog did too. I called 311 and reported the incident in case something similar happens to someone else. So a few months ago, I was out hiking with my friend. We live in the mountains of Western MD, and we were about 6 miles into an 8-mile loop we have done frequently when we decided to take some pictures and eat a snack at a summit. This area of the trail had a park, benches and tables, and a parking lot. We were sitting and talking, and I noticed a man just walking around the parking lot alone. He was walking aimlessly and staring at his feet. What confused me was that he was in jeans and a button-down shirt, not exactly hiking attire. We decide to set off on the last 2-mile leg of the loop. This part goes downhill to the headquarters of the park and is cut out of the mountain/bank. The end of that leg is the parking lot where our car is. You don't have a lot of visibility from the trail, and you have to walk single file. I was walking in front and talking to my friend. I turned to look at her, and I see the same man right behind her, following at a rudely close distance. I immediately got a gut-wrenching feeling. I noticed that he didn't have any pack or hiking gear and was not even wearing boots. Something about his eyes really scared me. So a bit more walking, and he continues to fall very close. I say to my friend that I have to tie my shoe as a reason to step off the trail and let him pass us, in case he is only following closely because he wants to go faster than we are. She immediately catches on to what I'm doing, and we pull over. He looks startled, and she says hello politely. He just stares. This is when I notice that he is carrying a stick. As I'm fiddling with my shoe, she stands between us, and he passes us. We wait to give him some distance ahead of us. But he immediately slows down. We wait for a bit longer, and he gets to the furthest part of the trail that has sight lines to us, and he turns around, looking up at us. We decided that something feels too wrong about this guy, and we don't want to have to pass him again. So we turn around and walk back up the trail towards the park with the tables and parking. A few minutes of walking up the trail, I look back and see him walking up the trail too. He's following us. I tell my friend to walk faster. We book it up the trail and get to the parking lot area we were at before. We start to strategize and wait, deciding that we will wait to see if he comes back up the trail to the lot. There are more people around here, so we felt safer waiting it out. About 20 minutes go by and nothing. We are talking about how that could mean that he kept going on the trail and is long gone, or is waiting on the trail where it is more deserted. We see a couple come up from the trail where we were, presumably taking the loop in the opposite direction that we are. We approach them and ask if they saw anyone on the trail between this lot and the next. They tell us they saw a young man sitting on a rock about halfway down. They describe the man who was following us. We explain our interaction with him to the wife and get into a conversation back and forth about whether or not he was a threat. The husband finally interjects and says, "We need to call a ranger. He wasn't just sitting there. He was using a knife to carve the stick." Needless to say, we called a ranger. The nice couple walked that last leg with us to make sure we got to our car safely and then even gave us their numbers in case we needed anything. The rangers then walked the trail, but there was no sight of him. I wish I knew where he went and what happened to him, but I'm glad to know that my instincts are legitimate. I lived in a very small town once when I worked for my laptop. Population 200 small. I was in a small cabin in the woods, though next to the highway. One day I was walking my dog and heard 2 gunshots somewhere nearby. Didn't think much of it, it's a hunting area, and it's kind of redneck-like. The next day, or the day after, a truck pulls up. I don't even know anyone in this town, so it's weird, and I'm put off. Guy calls me over and says he's my neighbor. Asks if I heard the shots. I said yeah. He claims it was his neighbor taking pot shots at his house over a land dispute. Doesn't ask me to be a witness for him or anything, just if I heard. Okay, it seems really odd to me. Never met this guy before, and when I say neighbor, I mean 500 meters to 1 kilometer away out of sight. Guy sees my dog digging somewhere unimportant, and all of a sudden starts trying to tell her not to do that. Gets out and she's iffy of him, says here watch, calls her over. Grabs her and tries to do the stupid ducking Cesar Chavez dominance, holding the dog on their back thing, for really no ducking reason. She starts yelping. I'm like, dude, stop. He asks me whether I have any guns myself. I say no. Says he is a great dog trainer. He asks me to go over and mow his lawn, and please ensure to bring your dog. In the strangest way, just like that. Please ensure you bring my dog's name. I can't describe it, but his mannerisms and the way he talked were just plain creepy, especially that line. He leaves soon after, and I'm thinking, duck, I just told this guy not only that I heard the gunshots, but that I'm unarmed here. How do I even know it was his neighbor like he claimed, and not in fact that this weird dude has shot someone at his home and is trying to see who might have heard/witnessed. I wouldn't go to his house, not a ducking chance. Horrible feeling. Then he kept showing up, asking why. Calling and texting, asking why. I gave him my number before realizing how weird he was. I'm really adamant I go over there. It turns out the guy is a total alpha. He lost his wife, lost his job, lost everything, a very dangerous mental state. Nothing to lose. The small store owners in town explained it to me. He's apparently the most hated guy in the valley. Bad reputation. I'm now really freaked out. I found it very hard to sleep after that. Cabin in the woods, nobody nearby that would hear any commotion, ample angles for the place to be approached from the woods, and just a can of bear spray and a knife. And the guy knows I have no guns. I would be kept up for hours listening at night for any movement outside, as it was dead silent there. One night, in the middle of the night, my dog starts to growl. Then growls more. I don't hear anything, but it didn't matter. Every room in that cabin had a window but the bathroom. I just got up, grabbed the knife and bear spray, and locked myself in that ducking bathroom for hours listening. I think I eventually fell asleep in there. I don't think I've ever felt that kind of dread. I just pictured this lunatic sneaking up with a shotgun to take me out, for maybe having heard him murder someone with a gun days earlier. Duck, it was just awful. I moved, but unfortunately the new landlords were equally creepy and even started trying to steal my dog, even though they had 3, literally. I heard them discussing it, how they had to make themselves the in crowd so that she'd want to be with them, and hand feeding her dog food when they thought I wasn't looking. It must have just been the small town thing, totally strange people in that town for the most part. They went to market one morning, I packed all my shit into my uninsured van with no license, and my pup, and ducking bailed that town and never looked back. Good God, it was hills have eyes shit mates, I'm telling ya. I'm a hunter, I like to hunt wild boar specifically. Though I have been deer hunting and have been known to get a turkey for Thanksgiving, I mostly hunt boar. For those of you that don't know, boars are a big problem in the United States. A sow can have 2 litters a year, and it's not uncommon for a litter to consist of 10 or more pigs. Given that pigs eat anything and everything, it's not difficult to see why the Department of Fish and Wildlife makes it legal to hunt them with almost no restrictions. In my state, it's illegal to hunt most large mammals with night vision or thermal vision scopes, with the exception of boars and coyotes. I had been saving for a year, primarily for enjoyment. It's challenging to explain to your wife that a scope that costs literally twice as much as the rifle I was mounting it on was worth it. But I did it. I took it to a range and sighted it in. There was an area that was peppered with boar activity that I knew would be perfect for a night hunt. It was easily accessible with my truck, with easy to find spots that I could set up and that overlooked a large, easy to navigate clearing. The night started uneventful, mostly me tinkering with my new toy, cycling through the settings. I was a little impatient. I'd spotted multiple deer, but they were out of season, and like I mentioned earlier, my current setup wasn't legal for deer. I moved to another spot I'd seen days earlier that probably wasn't much better than my first, but it gave me something to do and a new angle to look around with my new scope. After an hour or so of glassing the area, it dawned on me. This spot doesn't have much animal activity at all, no rabbits or owls. The deer that I'd seen were hundreds of yards from where I was. Why was this pocket of land so dead at night but lively in the day? I'd set up around 10 p.m., and it was about 2 a.m. when I started to think about packing up, maybe setting up a target before I left, and taking some practice shots. I heard a crunch come from the direction I came from before. I peeked my scope over and saw the silhouette of a small bear pushing through the bushes. It's important to note that my scope isn't exactly night vision. It's a thermal scope, kind of like a black and white version of what you see in the Predator movies. I adjusted my range and zoomed in a little. I remember jolting a little when I saw that it wasn't really a bear, it was a man. Because he was so low and hunched over, I thought I was looking at a young bear. Is that a game, Warden? It couldn't be. I would have seen the headlights coming up the road from where I was perched. And where could he have walked from? I was 30 miles away from anything and on public lands. I was about to call out when I adjusted my sights and noticed he was naked. No shoes, pants, or anything. I remember being disturbed by his movements, like a squirrel or something. Twitchy and grabbing at the foliage, sniffing around and palming the tree. Was that my tree? The one I'd been leaning against earlier? The thought terrified me. Could he smell me? Then he did something I still have nightmares about today. He squatted and placed his hands in the dirt between his feet and stared straight up like a dog mid-howl. And I heard it, a voice coming from that direction, a very compelling female voice. Help! I'm lost. There was a long pause, but neither of us moved a muscle. The center of my sights was trained at the dirt in front of his feet. I couldn't bring myself to aim directly at another person. It went against everything I'd been taught about firearms. Were they lost? Was this some guy that had gone crazy out here? Why was his voice so feminine? Help! Please! I can't walk. The voice called out. That's when I called bullshit. Not only could he walk, but when I first saw him, he was traversing the land with ease for a naked person, so good I mistook him for a bear. That's a ducking trap. This guy is trying to lure me to him with a damsel in his de-stress routine. Luckily, the lack of activity before had caused me to pack up most of my gear. I think I may have left behind a hat and a sitting pad, but I didn't give a shit in that moment. I took my eyes off him for a moment to get my pack on. I buckled my chest strap and scrambled for my rifle. To my horror, he was in the same position, but his face was staring in my direction, and I swear I saw a smile. The thermal scope has an effect that makes animals' eyes appear white. How the hell had he heard me get up and put my gear on? He must have easily been 150 yards away. Duck off! I screamed in that direction. He stood upright, and it hit me how tall and skinny he was. Easily 6 feet and very lean. He took a couple of long strides in my direction, and I instinctively sent a round sailing above his head into the tree line. He was freaky as hell, but he hadn't really threatened me. What would I tell the cops? I was unwilling and unready to shoot someone. He stopped dead in his tracks and hunched down on all fours. The next one will screw you up. Go away. He stayed on all fours, and this time I had my sights trained on the center of him. His eyes were just above the grass, like a large cat or something. I was trying to stop my trembling and knew that my voice had cracked a little on that last warning. I was terrified. That standoff probably only lasted a minute or two, maybe less, but it felt like forever. In an instant, he bolted left toward the tree line opposite the road. So much for not being able to walk. I could barely keep him in my scope, he was moving so fast. He disappeared into the brush, and I sent another bullet sailing high in his direction. I racked another round and tried to pocket that mag and swap for a fresh one, but I dropped it and didn't bother looking for it. I wasn't far from my truck, and I wanted to get out of there. I could hear him in the distance, yelling in this weird sound that could have been a laugh or a cry. I scrambled up the trail and arrived at my truck breathless. I tossed my gear into the cab but kept the rifle in the passenger seat and sped off. For the longest time, I told that story from the perspective of having spotted some deranged crackhead living off the land like some kind of caveman. I reported it to Fish and Game, but all they did was scold me for hunting at night alone. I never received an update. It wasn't until I told this story at a camping trip that my nephew told me about Wendigos, rakes, and skinwalkers. My story scared the piss out of him because the spot we were camping was technically the same forest I'd seen the bastard. Just 50 miles east of it. He was so spooked his mom, my cousin, had to take him home. She was really pissed. I've gone down the rabbit hole with these scary stories. I'm not saying what I saw definitely was a Wendigo or a skinwalker. I'm saying that if such a thing exists, I may have dodged quite the bullet that night. Or maybe it was just a tweaker being Donnie Thornberry in the middle of the night. Either way, thought I'd share. So I was around 11 to 12 and used to spend most days and evenings after school in the forest mountain biking with some friends. It was a time when we had extremely hot summers and near daylight at 9 p.m., so naturally we'd stay super late and session the downhill trails. I lived the furthest away out of all of us at the time, about 6 miles, and would stay late and do some extra runs, as I didn't have anyone to ride home with. One night after everyone made their way out and back home, I decided I was going to do 2 more runs and set off for home. I hit the trail and hauled ass all the way to the bottom and stopped dead on a flat run out at the end. Something primal took over. I had the feeling I was being watched. I whipped off my goggles and helmet and started to push up slowly, thinking I was being paranoid. I got the chills and started hearing sounds. Footsteps in the dirt, slogging, bushes. I pushed up faster until I hit part of the trail that was separated by an island of trees. I stopped, and the noises were close. I looked through the trees, and on the other side was a crazed-looking man, fairly dirty and dripping with sweat. He had a claw hammer in his hand and was looking around on the prowl. I suddenly felt paralyzed with pure terror. I picked up my bike so its wheels were off the ground, so he couldn't hear the freewheel ticking sound. And stood there, totally thinking I was about to die. I hear the same thing about 5 feet to my rear, and there is a bigger man of similar description, also with a hammer. I stand there motionless in this 8-foot wide island of trees for what felt like 10 minutes with my downhill bike in my skinny 12-year-old arms. They passed up the trail, and I have never moved so fast out of that place. My heart was pounding, and I felt sick. I got on the road into the small rural town I rode through on the way home and sat on a wall shaking. I got home and went to my room and never told anyone. I'm a young female and was going for a run on a popular trail. I typically feel safe running there, despite it being somewhat secluded, because there are normally a lot of people. But on this day, there were not as many people as usual because of a town event. I parked, and as I was getting out of my car, I noticed some really loud / intense music, which I found odd for the setting. I glanced over and saw a man in a white pickup who was staring at me from his side mirror, with his car running and music playing. He then immediately put his car in drive and drove off. I found it odd and a bit creepy, but figured he must have just been a man coming back from a run and was listening to pump up music or something. I then walked over to the trail entrance but realized my shoe was untied. I bent down and was behind a bush to tie my shoe, out of sight from the parking lot. I noticed the same truck drive down the road, U-turn, and then return to the parking lot. It was the same guy, only now his music was off. He parked again, now across from mine, and sat in his car. If I hadn't stopped to tie my shoe, I don't think I would have noticed. This is when I went into fight or flight mode. I wasn't sure what to do and was too scared to go back to my car, as there was no one else in the parking lot. I hid behind the bush for about 10 minutes until I saw another hiker down the trail. I explained the situation and asked if he would walk me back to my car. Thankfully, he was so kind and understanding. When I got back to the parking lot, the man in the truck got out but then froze. I don't think he noticed the hiker who walked back with me at first. I then got in my car and drove off, and the hiker who helped me returned to hiking. I was really shaken by the whole thing, but I was also wondering if I was just being paranoid. I just can't explain the man's actions. I genuinely want to understand why he would drive away only to immediately return to the parking lot to sit there for 10 minutes. I'm an avid mountain biker. Ever since I was about 13 to 14, I've always loved riding on the trails. It was good exercise, but I mostly liked to just listen to music and pedal. Never tried to time myself on a particular trail or anything. All I really did was keep track of my miles. So I remember this one day in particular. It may sound a tad bit far-fetched, so I welcome skepticism with open arms. I'm simply trying to get this off of my chest, and hopefully it's a wake-up call for anyone that was as trusting as I was. So I decided to go on a day ride at this one spot. I had been there before, but it wasn't one of my go-to trails, so I wasn't super familiar with it. I was familiar enough with it though to know where I would be okay going down the trails I had done in the past. So upon getting there, I was getting my pack ready. I met this one girl who was doing the same. We started talking and hit it off pretty well. At the time, she honestly seemed like someone I could be friends with. She introduced me to her boyfriend, who was also a mountain biker. Once again, no red flags. Very friendly. They seemed to have a very healthy relationship. They both seemed to be about my age, ballpark, give or take. They asked me if I wanted to take a ride with them down their favorite trail. I didn't see any harm in it. Plus, I wanted to learn the area better for potential future rides. So the trail was one that I had never been on before. The two of them were also faster than me. Like a lot faster. I never backed down from a challenge. I kept up, albeit probably being about 10 feet behind them the whole time. We stopped briefly to take a water break, and I noticed that the girl had strategically left her backpack open. Like she closed it, but then opened it back up a little bit. Seemed harmless then, but makes more sense now. Without any sort of warning, and while I was taking a pee break in the trees, the two of them started laughing and took off. I was in a compromised position, so I had to hurry up and conclude my business to be able to catch them. By the time I made it back to my bike, they were both completely out of sight. Not to mention, both of my tires had been slashed. I was stranded. I sat down for about 10 minutes to decide what I was going to do. The sun was at peak capacity, and I remember feeling extremely lightheaded, though I'm pretty sure this was related to shock. I grabbed my bike and started walking down the trail. After about 15 minutes of walking, I came across a wire on the trail. It was tied to two smaller trees. Had I been riding, that could have easily slit my throat. But the fact that they went through the trouble of slashing my tires made me question this. I hadn't seen them, so this may or may not have been them. Or they could have potentially left it there to try and snare another rider. I honestly don't know and don't much think about that part anymore. The what ifs makes the whole thing more frustrating. Regardless, I used my Swiss Army knife to remove the wire. I wasn't about to go any further down the trail, so I pushed my bike in the opposite direction that I came from. Close to 6 miles later, I made it back to my car. There is a bike rental shop nearby that I stopped at and asked them about the two. I gave them a description of the two but wasn't able to give them enough to have them identified. They offered to call the police, but after the day I had, I just wanted to go home. I do regret this, because over the years I had always wondered if they did this to anyone else. I did feel a level of guilt over this. I have never been back to that trail. I'm still a mountain biker, but I quit going alone since then. Thankfully, my husband is a fellow mountain biker, and I always have a buddy. Please stay safe, everyone, and don't always trust a pretty face. This was at Deschutes Park in WA State. It's a smallish trail that has a couple waterfall viewpoints. We went out because it was mushroom season and we were looking for chicken of the woods and oysters. So the three of us get to the park, there is no one else in the parking lot. Cool, we get to have the trail to ourselves and talk. We go down, mess about for an hour looking for mushrooms, and just enjoy the fresh air and quietness. We stop and see this giant oyster mushroom. This thing was like 2 pounds intact. I got real excited and said, "Whoa guys, look!" more loudly than normal. At this point we all looked, and I noticed some sticks cracking off in the woods. Then I hear a tree knock, and being in Bigfoot country that definitely snapped our attention behind us. NBD for cracks, squirrels and deer are around. But this sounded like a hard stick on a tree. We turn around. I see an older man, about 5 feet 7 inches, with glasses and gray hair, a red North Face windbreaker, and blue jeans jumping from behind a tree. He was holding a walking stick, so I assumed that was it. Like he was peering around the tree, spying on us dramatically, and jumped out, trying to appear normal. Then he ran toward us. This dude was not on the trail and got there after us. I kept hearing snaps in the woods throughout our walk, but it did not click until I saw him. Then he seemed not to notice us startled looking and ran toward us anyway. We tensed as he approached. We didn't have a weapon, but my boyfriend is pretty big. Me and my cousin are female. We were the ones talking loudly, so I'm sure he heard us and thought we were alone. He started walking with us, and I noticed he had a slight English accent. A formal sounding guy but creepy. He was saying, "Do you have any weapons? There's been bears down here." There were no bears we knew of in that area. He also asked us at the end of the trail if we wanted to partake in his ritual in the water. At the end of the trail, the water is kind of accessible, but it is freezing cold. This day was about 60 degrees Fahrenheit. No way this thinner old man is going to jump in there, I thought. But he was insistent on us going down there with him. I was like, no, thank you. I didn't know what else to say. I feel like this dude was either some weirdo creep looking to end us or some partially psychotic man on a hike. I really love through hiking and climbing, so I sleep outside for a great part of summer each year, almost never using tents because they are heavy as duck and also prohibited at most parts of my mountains. I had many scary encounters with animals, mostly due to the inhuman shrieks they can produce, but I tell you this, in all of nature, nothing is as scary as people. This is why I prefer camping deep in the woods to being just outside of the city limits, because it's always better to find family of wild hogs going through your stuff at 3 a.m. than to find family of coked out drug addicts going through your stuff at 3 a.m. But anyway, here are 2 of the stories of encountering people that came to mind. The first one, we were actually using tents because this was more of a get-together and drunk thing with my classmates at a nearby lake. So the night is surely upon us, so we decide to gather some wood in the nearby forest to keep the fire going through the night. Me and my pal take on this task, and as we approach the woods, we see there is another tent pitched right out of sight of our camping site. As we pass it, a dude pops out of the tent. We make small friendly chat about us staying there and him just camping and whatnot, and then we excuse ourselves that we need to get some wood for the fire, all fine and dandy, nothing unusual. Camping folks are usually chatty and friendly. Except for 2 things, by the setup of the tent and camping ground, he must have been there for a few days, and he planned to stay there for a while, which is okay. There are lots of photographers doing this as the place is famous for its sunrises, although I still shiver thinking about all the heavy tarps lying around, and secondly, he advised us to split as there were 2 paths going through the woods so that we could cover more ground. Which we did because, why not? He looked like he knew the area. So I am walking alone through the woods, my mate taking the other path, which was directly above mine, and he could still see down on my trail. When I hear him shout my name, I turn around to see what's happening, and I see the guy from the tent following me on the trail, which he saw from above, wielding a duck and machete. The guy says that after we left, he realized we didn't have any axes or anything to chop down the wood, although we said we were collecting it, and chopping it down would be illegal there, so he thought he would help me with that. Which I politely refused and got the hell out of there meeting my mate, who was already on his route there. So we came back to the camping site with next to no fuel for the fire, and everyone keeps making fun of us, saying that we are paranoid and the guy surely wanted to help. Whatever, we proceed to drink, and night falls. We almost forgot about the incident, and all is well again when I see a headlamp approaching our campsite. It is that guy from the tent coming to our site. He is bearing a bunch of wood in his arms, saying that he knew we didn't take much of the fuel, so he brought us some. Then he walks all around our camping site before putting it down. I mean, There was really no need for that as the fire was in the middle, and checking the tents, asking whether this is all of us and if someone else is coming, not creepy at all. After a moment of uncomfortable silence, he tells us to enjoy our night and gets out. Understandably everybody is creeped out by now, and different theories pop up, such as that he brought the wood only to make sure that we won't kill the fire before we go to sleep, so that he knows when that happens, or that the occasional flash from the direction of his campsite is the flash from his binoculars. Well, no one went to sleep that night, and we were not drinking anymore. After the sun went up, we took a 2-hour nap, rotating guards, and packed our shit and left as soon as possible. The other one was that we were on a climbing trip and slept under the stars really deep in the woods, well off all the known trails and places in the areas, as sleeping there is prohibited, and the rangers are very strict about this, issuing very large fines if they catch you, so essentially we were hiding deep in the woods. We cooked some great dinner, man, nothing tastes so good as MRE after a full day of climbing, camped out in the mountains, drank some wine, talked shit a bit, and went to sleep as we were really tired. At about 2 a.m., we are all woken up. There were 4 of us, by voices. By shitload of voices, it sounded like a school trip somewhere in the distance, lots of kids talking to each other, presumably walking in a group. That itself was scary as duck, a bunch of kids walking in the woods at 2 a.m., and they must have been off any trail as we went on purpose out of the reach of any of the known trails. No one is talking, we all sit there and listen, the voices pass. Then the second wave of a similar group of voices passes nearby, and then we hear someone approach our site through the woods. There must be more of them based on the sounds they are making, and then it happened. It was a group of 5 kids, roughly 13 years old, walking in the direction of the voices. They walk around our site, silently greeting us and nodding in our direction as they pass about 3 meters from our sleeping bags and continue toward all the voices. To make it all more creepy, none of them had any headlamp or flashlight or any source of light. It was full moon, so the visibility was good, but still. I have no idea what that was supposed to mean, but it was really weird and honestly scary. It could have been some scouts, as that was a well-established outdoorsy place, the whole area, but still, a bunch of kids alone in the woods, well off any known trail, walking without any source of light at 2 a.m., just right by us. There are lots of weird things happening when you camp, but trust me, nothing is as scary as other human beings. I live in a quiet countryside where there is usually nothing happening. I'm an 18-year-old girl who can easily walk around my hometown alone without even being scared because it's really safe here. Basically, no crimes. So, as usual, me and my dog went for a walk one evening. It was nice weather outside, so I decided to go to a nearby field. I usually let my dog out of her leash there, so it was fun for both of us. She's a nice dog and always comes when I call for her. We get to the field and everything is going really well and nothing seems off, except I have this kind of odd feeling in my gut that I never usually have. The last time I had the same feeling was when I was 8 years old and we were driving at night with my family. I had the same feeling then, and I told it to my parents. I feel like something is wrong, you should be careful, I said something like that. They slowed down because I was oddly serious at the moment. A minute after I said it, a deer came out of nowhere, and we would have been crushed if we had gone by the same speed as a minute before. We were all shocked, and my mom thanked me. I still remember it like it was yesterday. However, in the field, 10 years later, I get the same gut feeling. Whatever I think and keep going completely ignoring it. We roll around the fields and a nearby forest until the sunset starts to set. I put my dog back on her leash and decide to leave from one of the tiny paths that go through a small forest. It's the quickest way to my home. It's not a popular way to go, but it's quick. As I'm walking along that path, I suddenly spot a silhouette at the end of the road just before the forest starts. I think nothing of it at that point and just keep walking, but after just a little while I have a strong gut feeling and stare at the silhouette for a while. It's then that I notice that the silhouette is staring at me without moving. I just think that maybe they were waiting for someone, because at first the silhouette looked like a child's. But as I got closer, I noticed that it wasn't a child but a grown man who was riding a difficult-looking child's bicycle. It was a blue-green boy's bicycle, his legs were way too long for it, and his whole body looked like he was forcing himself to ride it. It was really an unsettling sight. Still, my dumbass didn't want to turn around and have a couple of kilometers of wasted time. And even though it was creepy looking, I still thought, maybe he's waiting for someone that comes from my way? But every step I take, he follows me with intense expression. I'm only like 20 meters away from him when he starts to do a weird jumps on his bike, smiling the ugliest and most unsettling smile I've ever seen, just staring at me with wide eyes. He kind of looks like he was expecting something and is so excited about it that he needs to jump. He looks like he's in his 50s or something, very long and thin legs and arms, bald, and that creepy, Unsettling smile. That's when my alarm rings went on. I glanced behind me, and no one was there. It was just me, an 18-year-old small girl with her fluffy, definitely not a guard, dog. I turn around 360 and start to jog where I came from, just in case. I glanced at him and sighed in relief when I noticed he wasn't following me or anything. I thought that maybe he wasn't waiting for me after all and called myself stupid and a scaredy cat. I was so wrong. My adrenaline starts to slow down again as I'm in the middle of the fields, and I still see no sign of him following me. I let my dog out of her leash again, and she starts to run around. I'm nearly at the end of the field. I only have a kilometer or a forest part before I get to my home after the field part, when my dog spots a rabbit or deer or some interesting thing and flies towards it. I panic because she has never done that before and yell for her. I yell plenty of times for her loudly, and finally she comes back. I'm relieved that nothing happened to her, but as I put her back on her leash, I notice something from the corner of my eye. The freaking bald man with long legs is biking towards me. He's not looking at the ground when he bikes, but me. Freak out wasn't enough to express my feeling in that moment. I have never seen a human who looks so crazy. More than crazy. What surprised me the most was that he was biking through a field, and I can tell you it is not an easy field to even walk in sometimes. It has muddy ponds that you need to jump over, but that psycho just biked through them. He was struggling a lot to bike there but somehow managed to still do that. I didn't watch for another second behind me because I just started running. I ran so freaking full speed, and I have asthma, that I saw black and nearly collapsed. My lungs hurt so bad that I thought I was dying, but the adrenaline kept my blood running in my legs too. Once I glanced behind me, and he was there, struggling badly to keep up his full speed on the field grounds with that ugly white smile and the way too little bike. After that, I just ran like crazy until I found a house and hid in their yard without even minding that I was in someone else's yard. It didn't matter to me in that moment at all. I waited a while with my breathing stuck in my throat, but he didn't come. I was planning to yell as loudly as I could if he found me, but he never did. At some point the adrenaline started leaving my system, and I left my hiding spot. I ran again until I reached an area that had multiple people in their yards, so I would have helped if I saw him again. But I didn't. I typed 911 into my phone but couldn't bring myself to call, mostly because I had no proof and I didn't want my parents to find out because they are overprotecting, so I wouldn't probably leave my house anymore. I still live with them. Side note, I've been paranoid after this incident. My dog was frightened too. I guess she noticed something was really off too. I swear to God that I will always listen to my gut when it's telling me something from now on. I'm still scared of him. I've expected to randomly spot him in some area and what he could have done to me. I can't forget his awful smile. I feel like he's going to jump on my window one night and do what he wants to me. I feel paranoid and helpless. I'm still thinking about calling the police. I was out camping with my mom and then 6-year-old brother when a white pickup truck pulled up into our campsite. 3 or 4 guys get out of the truck, all wearing small, bright white lights attached to their hats that blind us from seeing their faces much. They approach my mom and start asking her questions about who we are and what our plans are for the night. My little brother started whimpering, and stopped eating the Doritos he'd been happily munching on, and I got the impression that my mom was creeped out as well. So the men left after about 5 minutes and told my mom that they were official campground employees who were just making sure everyone was doing alright. Their truck certainly didn't look official, and they weren't wearing anything that would suggest they were more than just regular, albeit creepy, dudes wandering around and being nosy. My mom told my brother and I to get in the car and take only a few essentials, like clothes and a bit of food, and we went to my grandmother's house and spent the night there instead. We left the tent at the campsite, giving the illusion that we were still there. The next morning, after we had told my grandmother about what happened and that we were suspicious, we went back to the campsite to gather our things and head home. When we pulled up, we immediately noticed that our stuff had been picked through by someone who wasn't us. There were footprints leading up to our tent, and the zipper was stuck, halfway open, like someone was trying to close it. It was closed when we left it, and they didn't succeed. Our sleeping bags also had boot prints on them. We never saw those guys again, but we still wonder what would have happened if we'd stayed. I was cycling through Kyrgyzstan in the summer and trying to find a campsite. I was cycling around a lake that is very popular for the nomadic herders. I couldn't find anywhere flat to camp that didn't already have yurts and animals. I asked a family if I could camp next to their yurt. I had done this a few times before and it is usually fine, and they said yes. In the middle of the night, I woke up, and there was a silhouette of a man crouching next to my tent. It was nearly a full moon. I am by myself, female, and freaking out. He reaches under the canopy of my tent and starts touching my things, water bladder, sandals, etc. I grab a shoe and start hitting his hand and tell him to duck off. He moves around to the back of the tent, crouches down, and slides his hand under the floor. I whack his hand with my shoe some more. He moves a couple of meters away from my tent but stands there, smoking a cigarette for a little while. I sit in my tent, waiting for the adrenaline to go away so I can go back to sleep. The only reason that made me feel a little bit safe is that he never tried to get into the tent. The next day I thought about calling the whole bicycle trip quits, but I was in the middle of nowhere and had to keep going. I am now in Turkey, on my way to Europe, and everything is going pretty well. That is my scariest camping story after being on the road for a bit over 4 months and camping by myself for most of it. When I was 13 to 14 years old, I was invited to a birthday party of a close friend of mine down the street. There were a dozen of us, or something around that, as he had invited close personal friends and a couple of classmates, inside his basement living room, alternating turns on who gets to play Super Smash Melee on the GameCube. As the hours passed, the sweaty gaming by a dozen or so sweaty young teenagers was slowly but surely increasing the temperature of the room as there was only a single window that was poorly circulating the air inside. We decided to head out for a quick breather to cool down and let the air in the room renew. This story takes place in Norway, a country not particularly known for its high criminality rates and psycho murders, besides the 2011 shootings that happened many years after I was done being a sweaty teenager, so parents tend to be quite fine with letting children and teenagers out into the dark for short periods of time. This is where the wood gets relevant. Behind the house, there was a forest. Now, forests aren't particularly rare at all, and besides stories of trolls and monsters, there wasn't all that much to be afraid of. The house and the forest were separated by a road, with a single streetlight illuminating the pavement/sidewalk closest to the house. We were all gathered outside the back of the house, getting some fresh air, as one of us spotted 2 reflective lights, looking sort of like eyes. After 5 minutes of back and forth speculating as to what it might be and daring each other to go investigate, I rationally thought that it most likely was glass or something of the sort simply reflecting the dimly lit street light. I walked away from the group, making my way towards the 2 eyes 30 or something yards/meters away. I came to the source and realized it was simply a sheet of clear plastic. I picked it up, turned around, and announced what it was. That's when something happened. My friends started yelling loudly, some started running towards the house. As the sheep of a teenager I was, and in my bewildered situation, I ran towards them as I didn't want to be left behind. I got into the hallway of the house where all the others had gathered, as well as my friends' parents, and saw that some of the others were crying. Unclear as to what just happened, I, of course, asked what was going on, what had disturbed everyone so much to the point of tears, something that teenage males are not particularly fond of doing in front of other male friends. Heaving for breath, the birthday kid told me that in the instance where I had turned around, a man, presumably in his mid-40s according to some of the others, had suddenly appeared behind me with his arms reaching out in a choking hold. According to the ones that were the last to run back indoors who witnessed when I started to run, he had been inches away by the time I started sprinting back. The police weren't called, as, well, this was a group of teenagers claiming to have seen a man presumably ready to choke me at 10 o'clock on a Saturday night, and nothing actually happened. However, I do think back and wonder, was I about to be kidnapped? Was he simply going to strangle me to death in front of my friends, or was it merely an act of collective imagination getting out of hand after having previously been spooked by reflective plastic? I cross-country run, I have high endurance, and I love being in the woods hiking with friends. But I train really hard, so occasionally I like to go alone with just me and my dog to places I wouldn't want to put other people at risk. And I truly love absolute quietness. I like to go to places where I will never hear a car or people talking. It really grounds me. On this particular trip, I found a shed cabin on Airbnb. It was so quaint and perfect for just my dog and me. It had a wall made entirely of windows facing a creek and hill. I say this because the wall of windows will make sense later. I loved it right away because you can watch wildlife while waking up. But it was so far away from even a tower that GPS could only take me so far. I knew I was close, but I was also lost. I saw church and a guy at the church. I assumed a God-fearing man would be safe to trust for direction. And he showed me exactly where to go. I found it, unpacked and went on a great hike, came back, and took a lovely shower, outdoor shower, because it was really away from everything. And relaxed with my book and dog. At 11 p.m., I hear a truck pull up behind my tiny cabin. I always carry a firearm, I'm trained to use it, and I always pack it on me in case I run into a territorial bear or mountain lion. It makes me feel safer. I grabbed it and put my arm behind my back. I don't want to intimidate anyone, but it's just me myself. The man in the truck was the man I asked for directions from. He wouldn't come to the cabin because I have a very trained German Shepherd that went into guard mode. As soon as he stepped out of the truck, he didn't walk forward, he just called out, "I'm just checking if you're okay, and you made it. Have a good night," and he left. Ducking weird, right? Well, it gets 10 times worse. The next day I hiked from 6 in the morning and didn't get back until 9 at night. I took that wonderful outdoor waterfall shower, but instead of reading, my dog and I were exhausted. We went straight to bed, and I was watching some movies I downloaded. Now when I say shed cabin, it was literally just a really cute shed, and the front wall was made of entire windows. I kept their outdoor light on because the dark was really scary. Being alone, you got antsy. At around 11:30, I heard a banging on the side door. Whoever it was had to walk here. I did not hear a vehicle. Instant fear, like there's no way it's that guy. So I flip my phone down, and I pretend like I'm sleeping. My dog even kind of pretended. But when he decided to go on the front porch covered in windows, I had to jump up because my dog was going to lunge through a window. He forced me to acknowledge him. I stood up and, through the window, I wanted him to visibly see me grab my sharp 1911, put it in my back pocket, put my dog in a heel, and open the door. One I could tell you, he was visibly intoxicated. He had a small cooler full of beer and ducking popsicles. He said, "I'm just checking up on you again, and I know it's hot in there, so I was wondering if you wanted some beer and a popsicle. We should hang out." I said, "No, thank you. I'm really tired. You need to leave." He started getting aggressive. He said, "You really need to eat the popcorn, you're going to overheat in there." I could see that the big mean-ass dog and gun in my back pocket weren't going to work. So as a woman, I had to do the smartest option I could pick instead of one of us dying in the next few minutes. I put on my sweet girly tone, and I told him that I got into a really bad accident hiking, and I was really tired. And I really wanted to sleep, but as a local, would he meet me here at 10 the next morning? He got really excited. He said, "Yeah, I know all the hidden places." He then aggressively told me to text him right now so he can get a hold of me tomorrow, which I did. I texted him with my real number so he didn't have any room to get upset. Without warning, he grabbed me and gave me a hug. My dog broke her heel and lunged. He jumped off of me really fast. He said, "All right, puppy, I will leave your mommy alone. But make sure she eats that popsicle when I leave." He left, and I was packing up, getting the duck out of Dodge. I was in a panic. But then it all came crashing down. How did he know I wasn't actually sleeping? How did he know I was insanely sweaty? How did he hear me tell my dog, "Damn it, I forgot my beer"? It hit me so hard. He's watching me out in the woods. He wants me to eat that popcorn so he can watch me from his little hiding spot. He's been watching me shower. For 2 days now. Realizing that I'm alone with no houses to run to, GPS doesn't work, it's dark outside, and if you run off the road, it's a cliff. I'm stuck right now in a place where screaming wouldn't help me. It was a traumatizing fear. I felt extremely violated and trapped. But I knew he was drinking, so I knew he had to pass out at some point. So I decided to turn off all the lights and be in pitch black so he can't see, hold my gun and wait until the first tiny bit of dawn. And it worked. I got out of there. I knew I told him to come at 10, I should be hours ahead of him. And it worked, I escaped. By 9, I was safe in my home. I called the Airbnb and told them it was very unsafe that some girls were going to get severely hurt. They refunded me blah blah blah. But at 9:30 that man called me. He said, "Where are you?" And I told him how creepy and delusional he is. He called me a smart little city girl and said that not everyone was like that. Then told me to burn in hell. I reported the number, they couldn't really do anything and blocked it. And girls, please never be alone without backup plans of protection. If you see a bear charging at the sky and shooting, the sound will scare it off, but if a man is putting you in danger, know the sound won't work. My girlfriend and I stayed at a MN State Park one weekend for a Saturday and Sunday night. Saturday was great, we got in, set up camp, cooked, and had some wine. Pretty basic. The campground was mostly full, and we listened to the usual noises, conversations, and a few drunk people like usual. Sunday was different. We had a nice morning of hiking, then came back to the site to play Scrabble and relax. All afternoon we watched the other campsites pack up and leave. By 6 to 7 p.m., we were the only people there. Both of us noticed but didn't really say anything. It just was very quiet. About an hour before sundown, a crappy old car with 2 guys came slowly cruising through the campground. They went really slow and made eye contact as they drove by. It was very creepy. I assumed they were just looking for forgotten stuff like chairs and other camping gear. But man, it was weird. When it got dark, We were both pretty jumpy. It was pitch black out. Neither one of us wanted to stay up and watch the campfire, so we quickly got ready. As I was brushing my teeth, I heard a noise by the picnic table, and we both jumped. When I shined my headlamp in direction, we saw that it was just a raccoon looking for food. We were done with it, so we got in the tent and went to bed. Later that night we woke up to a car driving by again, the raccoon growling right by the tent and a cat fighting with something. That was the last time we stayed in a state park on a Sunday night. Phew. 2 years ago, on an October hike with a group of scouts at Botano Creek, in California, this park contained a decommissioned honor camp, a minimum security prison, but it was closed. Part of the trail did lead past the entrance. We had to camp at 2 sites that were about 150 yards apart, due to space limitations. I was one of 2 adults, so the other adult was at the other campsite. Right around 1 a.m., I'm awakened by a series of loud bangs. Unmistakable gunshots. They're being fired in rapid succession, in groups of 10 to 30 or so, with brief pauses. There's another, louder gun being fired too. It sounded like a shootout. But nobody screamed or anything. It went on for probably a good 2 minutes, well, over 100 rounds fired. It could have been about 200 to 300 yards away. Maybe closer, it's really hard to tell because I don't have a lot of experience with that sort of thing. I got up out of my tent, in my long johns and flip-flops, and looked into the tents the boys were in at my site with my headlamp. They were actually all still asleep. They slept through that. Then I made my way up the trail, trying to hide my light in case the gunman would see me. I was trying to figure out what could have gone on. I thought that maybe this was a drug gang growing stuff in the woods. I couldn't think of a reason why they'd just shoot at a bunch of Boy Scouts in the middle of the night, but I believed that this was what I could be stumbling into. I had to sneak up to the camp very quietly. Apparently they were closer because some of those boys were awake. They had their flashlights on in their tent, and they were talking about it and trying to figure out what they should do. I had them quiet down. The other adult was sound asleep. Never heard a thing. None of them could tell me what direction they thought the shooting had come from. So I hiked back down to my site, climbed back into my tent, and basically laid there until the sun came up. When we got back, we found out, from the ranger, that sometimes people sneak into the honor camp at night and illegally practice at the guard's gun range. This typically occurs only in the off-season, which was the case this time. I'm from Australia and lived there during this event. At the time my girlfriend, now wife, lived in another country but was visiting me over Christmas break. I lived in a big city, which if you drove about an hour in any direction would either lead to another city or beautiful nature, in my opinion. My friends and I decided to take my GF at the time to see some of this beautiful nature and decide on a national park about an hour and a half from where we lived. This place is definitely no sort of secret location, it's very well known, but there are a ton of different areas to it, all with different rural and windy roads taking you to the various areas of the park. We'd gone in 2 different cars, my friends in one, me and my GF in another to have some time together. We finished out the day of hiking and were heading home down one of the less common roads. I remember seeing this really beat up old 70s sedan with a wild looking dude in the driver's seat drive past us in the other direction. This wasn't uncommon as there are a lot of smaller, less economically sound towns spattered around the area, but for some reason he and his car stood out, and my GF noticed it as well. About 200 meters further down the very windy road there was a pull-off area, just a semicircle of gravel you could pull off to look at the view towards the ocean. There was a camper van belonging to a company that mostly rented out colorful vans to backpackers parked there with a woman standing in front of it. As soon as she sees us, she jumps out onto the road and flags us down. Now I've read enough of these to know pulling in to help her on a quiet road might not be the safest idea, but back then I hadn't, and my friends were in the car directly behind us. Luckily, she wasn't the person I didn't want to meet. She was quite obviously upset and scared when we pulled in. I told my GF to wait in the car, and I got out to speak to her. She was almost in tears. I can't remember where she was from, but it was a Central European country from memory, touring around with her 4 or 5-year-old daughter. She told me her van had broken down, and she'd pulled off there and called the van company's assistance line and was waiting for help. By this time my friends had pulled in behind us, and a couple of them had come over to see what was up. Apparently a scary man had driven past her a few times already, first time pulling over to offer to take her and her daughter to the nearest town for help. She'd thanked him and said no and that she was waiting for the assistance vehicle. He left but then kept driving past every 10 to 15 minutes in opposite directions, slowing down and looking at them, then driving off. She begged us to stay with her while she waited for the assistance vehicle because this guy terrified her and her daughter. I agreed. My friends being the awesome people they are decided me and my GF were enough, and they ditched us. Thanks guys. We stayed with the woman for a little while before the car my GF and I had seen earlier drove past, kind of slow coming the opposite way we'd seen him the first time. As soon as he'd driven around the bend, the lady told us that was the scary man that she'd been seeing before we got there. This got my GF and I to take her much more seriously after the feeling we got from the guy just seeing him on the road. A few minutes later, he came back from the other direction and pulled into the parking area. Some more context, I am not an intimidating man. I'm tall-ish, but I have almost zero muscle and fairly soft features. So there's not at all intimidating me, a terrified foreign woman, her tiny daughter, and my GF, who doesn't look that intimidating but is tough as nails, parked off a quiet road in a rural location with a not so nice looking dude pulling into where we were. Great. He gets out and is a redneck as hell and definitely not friendly looking. No judgment on the redneck part, I come from a poorer country town north of our city, and those are my people, but hopefully that sets a picture. He strolls over to us, and at this point I walk towards him to put myself between the girls and him. I have no idea where this bravery came from. I would definitely not describe myself as a brave person normally. He looks at the girls and then me and asks if he can help. I tell him no, we're just waiting for the assistance vehicle, and I tell him we've got it covered. He then says maybe he could stay and wait with the woman and her daughter so we don't have to. I tell him we're happy to stay and thank him, but again, we've got it covered. He kind of just stood there for a while staring at all of us, not really saying anything, giving off mega creepy vibes. After what seemed like forever, another car drove past us and looked out but kept going. This seemed to startle him. He mumbled good luck and got in his car and drove off. We waited with this poor scared woman and her daughter for almost 90 minutes, ended up talking a lot, and hopefully we had made her opinions of Australians a little brighter after Mega Creep, who drove past once more about 15 minutes after he'd left us. Finally the assistance vehicle arrived, a bigger dude who could definitely handle himself. I asked to see his ID and stuff to be safe, but he was in a car marked by the company, had all his tools, and definitely seemed legit. We gave the lady my number and asked her to text me when she was off safe. She was so grateful to us for staying with her for such a long time. It made me feel good that even if this dude was just a weird looking, awkward country guy that didn't mean harm and was really just trying to help, we had still made her feel more comfortable in a strange country. I don't think he was, and I definitely believe he was up to no good, but you never know. I did get a message from her to say she was safe, so everything ended well. My family has a cabin in the middle of the woods in northern Michigan. We've had it for years and years, but only recently have some unexplained odd things happened, and the police have even been out to search the place. The last time I went to the cabin was the worst experience. I went up with my friend, for context purposes, we're two girls in our late 20s, and arrived at dark. We got out and unloaded but had trouble turning on the power. It has an outside electrical box, because the lock was frozen shut. We were trying to get it unstuck but kept hearing noises around the cabin. Finally, it sounded like the noises were very close to us, and, as we weren't getting anywhere with the lock, we rushed inside in case it was a bear milling around. We sat inside for maybe 5 minutes before deciding to drive out to the nearest town to get a motel for the night. We would come back once it was light to get the power on. We grabbed a few things and headed back out to the car. I got in and turned the car on, but nothing happened. The car was 100% unresponsive. The doors wouldn't even lock. My car had absolutely no issues. We had just driven 3 hours to the cabin without any problems. Something had to have happened to the car in the few minutes we were inside. I told my friend we needed to get back inside. We got to the door and locked up behind us. We looked at each other, suddenly scared. Our car was totally dead. We had absolutely zero cell service, and we had no power. We tried to stay calm. We made a new game plan. We were just going to rough it for the night and then, at first light, walk in the direction of civilization until we got a cell signal or ran in to help. Only a short time later, we were sitting together in the living room quietly talking. Suddenly there were 2 sharp, loud knocks on the back door of the cabin. We are both absolutely frozen. We sat there, horrified and shaking, just waiting for someone to push their way into the door or window. This was a mobile home, so it would take very minimal effort to break in. We were met with only silence but now knew someone was outside. What did they want? It was much scarier to think they hadn't broken in. They just potentially sabotaged our car and were now knocking on our door to toy with us. We sat, silent and terrified. After a while, we started talking again, only to have something bang on a window. Just one loud smack. I've never been so scared. We quickly realized we just had to stay alert and awake until morning. We just had to hope that whoever was outside didn't try to get in. It didn't, but the pattern of the knocks on the window continued for hours. As soon as the sun was up, we ventured outside. We took a look under the hood of my car next. It turns out the bolt that clamps the metal piece to the battery terminal was loosed almost completely. The nut was all the way loosened, 1 or 2 turns more and they would have fallen off completely. So my sister was telling me this story that happened to her sometime last year. We live in Australia, and my sister, her boyfriend, and some other friends of hers went for a camping holiday in Tasmania. For people that don't know, that's the little island down the bottom of Australia. So anyway, they had hired camper vans to get around in and were driving in a pretty rural area, basically in the middle of nowhere. My sister and her friends found a nice beach and decided to camp there for the night. It was about 4 or 5 o'clock when they settled. A van was already parked on the beach before them, about 40 meters away, but at that stage they didn't care. They did notice though that a figure, which looked like a man, was sitting in the back seat of the van completely still and didn't seem to be moving around much, except for some small motions. Once again, they weren't too worried and just thought it was some random dude perving on them while they were at the beach. As it got darker and later, a friend of my sister's started to get a little paranoid. After all, this guy had been sitting there for a couple of hours now, just staring at them. They had come up with several theories as to what the guy was up to, if he needed help or something, or if this guy was just plain old ducked up. So it was maybe about 10 o'clock by now, and everyone was getting pretty nervous and was thinking about driving off and finding another place to spend the night, but they decided to stay a little longer. One of them was feeling pretty brave, so he went up to the van with a flashlight, at a distance, while the others shone the headlights into the van to take a closer look. So they saw this guy, just sitting still, with heaps of these sheets of weird black plastic everywhere, in the back seat with him. In the end, everybody was just too creeped out, so they eventually drove off. But to this day, nobody knows what he was doing there or planning to do. My New Year resolution 2012 was to get in shape again. After my first child was born, I had lost my athletic interest, but I had every intention of getting it back. So I started running 4 days a week with my friend Hannah, who is a great runner and motivator. We would run after work, 5 to 10 kilometers, usually favoring the forest trail. It's the kind of trail that gets lightning in the darker months of the year, so you can run there anytime really. Once you turn on the lights, you have 45 minutes to run the shorter trails and longer to run the longer ones. Then the lights shut off automatically. We had been running for about 2 months when we started seeing the same man hanging around the parking lot every time we got there. Thin man, 25 to 30 years of age, always dressed in sports clothes but never actually running. He never looked you in the eye either. We speculated that he could be homeless camping nearby because he was constantly there. We got used to seeing him sitting somewhere close by, silently, and always on his own. We felt sorry for him. He never seemed to talk to anyone or interact at all, but there was something about him that made us hesitate to talk to him or ask if he was okay. I can't pinpoint what it was, but something wasn't completely right with him. One evening Hannah didn't make it to our run, and I decided to go on my own. I arrived at the parking lot, my car being the only car there. I did some stretching, turned on the lights, and set off on the 5 kilometers trail. I hadn't seen the thin, silent man when I started my run. Perhaps it was getting too cold to sit there now that it was autumn, dark, and getting closer to the freezing point. He must have been there though, somewhere in the shadows, because when I got to the top of the first steep hill, I could hear heavy breathing somewhere behind me. I look over my shoulder, and I see him. He is running like a man obsessed. In regular shoes, not running shoes, with his arms moving in a really strange, stiff manner as if he were made of metal, his hands like arrows, straight and in an upward/inward angle. Sort of like a sprinter but more extreme, moving like a robot. For the first time, he looked me straight in the eyes, and it was the eyes of a predatory animal, and it made my heart freeze. He had never done anything to harm me or anyone else as far as I knew, but the look in his eyes alone was enough to let me know that I was facing a serious threat. I started running faster, trying to create distance between us, and I could hear his heavy breathing getting even more strained. I ran like my life depended on it, adrenaline pumping through my body and giving me new strength. I tore off my necklace and threw it on the ground, thinking, I must leave a trace if he takes me, something must be left behind. I tried screaming, hoping someone would be close enough to hear me, but I couldn't scream my lungs out and keep up the phase at the same time. Why is he doing this? What does he want? Who is he? I thought as I started to feel my lungs burn. Then I thought of my 15-month-old daughter and ran until I could taste blood in my mouth. He was still behind me, maybe 100 meters behind now, but I figured that if I trip and fall, or run out of energy, or fumble with the car keys once I reach the parking lot, then I'm screwed. So once I reached the sharp turn on the trail, I went off the trail and ran straight into the dark woods. I ran only a short distance, and then I laid down flat on my stomach, my hands searching for a rock to defend myself with if he found me. I realized that I was wearing bright running clothes with reflexes and neon coloring. I had never felt so visible in the dark before. I could hear him reach the turn and thank God, keep on running. I started to slowly and as silently as possible move further into the darkness. My heart sank again as soon as I heard rapid footsteps closing in from the trail. He had realized that I must have gone off the trail once he saw that there was no sign of me ahead. He stopped, and I stopped. I could imagine him listening for any sound, and I held my breath and begged to God I don't believe in to make him go away. After a while, I heard him say something in a language I didn't recognize and walk off. I didn't move. I feared that he would wait for me by the car and realized that I had to get off the trail and onto the main road and stop someone. I couldn't go back to the parking lot. I started to make my way further into the woods, knowing that I would eventually end up on the last part of the long tail and close to the main road. The lights on the trail suddenly shut off. That made me calmer at first. The dark was a comfort and protection, but then, after only a few moments, it switched on again. This could mean that another person had just started their run, and soon I would have someone there to help me, or that he was out looking for me. Or getting ready to pray for another lonely runner. I decided against waiting to find out and continued my way along the main road. It was dark, and I fell multiple times, my clothes getting wet from the damp vegetation, and I started to get cold. After what felt like a lifetime, I could see the 10 kilometers trail ahead and knew I was close to the main road. Soon I could hear the traffic. Once I made it to the road, I must have looked like I had been in a terrible accident. Blood from several small cuts from the falling, my clothes dirty, and my face, I assume, petrified. My bright runner's shirt soon attracted the attention of a passing car. My waving and desperate shouting made it stop. The driver, a 40-ish man with his 2 kids in the back seat, spent the next 10 minutes or so trying to make sense of what I tried to say between the sobbing and the crying. He asked if I wanted a lift back to the parking lot, and I told him no, please take me home instead. At home, my husband insisted on going to the parking lot to retrieve the car and calling the police. And report what? I asked. No crime had been committed. I just knew that he was out to get me. My husband went back for the car. The driver's seat window was smashed, and my phone was gone. So was the photo of my daughter that I had hanging from the mirror. I don't know what he was trying to do or why he chased me the way he did. But the look in his eyes, there was no doubt he had bad intentions. I used to work in a haunted park around Halloween every year when I was in high school, 10 years ago. One year we had some exchange students who took the spot I was usually assigned to do. I was left hiding among the trees instead of my usual graveyard scene. Now, usually, you would have every group assigned to a single scene, but occasionally you would get wanderers. These were people who either came last minute or were friends with someone who ran the event, but they had nowhere to go. The downside to this was that it was just in the woods, and there were no cops, security, or anything. So the only regulation we had was teachers who came while the sun was still up to make sure we were all in costume and that any chainsaws being used had the chain taken off. Now, this particular year was pretty out of control. First, there was a wanderer dressed as an evil clown chasing a single group through every scene with a chainsaw. He was huge and clearly not one of the students, so it is still unknown if he didn't have the chain on. Second, someone was hiding in the woods, throwing rocks at people working in the walkthrough and performing on the stage. One girl I knew came through the walk to warn everyone of the rock throwing while we waited for the police and EMS. She was actually bleeding from her face because a sharp rock had hit her particularly hard. Lastly, before the police came, we were still letting groups through the walk unhindered. In between groups, I decided to hide behind a tree everyone had to pass to make it through the cemetery. For context, there are no lights besides what is coming from the tent of the next scene, and the houses outside the thock brush off the trees that have been covered by tarps to contain our cemetery scene. It also acted as a backdrop. I also had poor vision and couldn't see much. So as I'm standing there, waiting to hear the next group come by, I am surprised to find someone come out of the thick of the woods at me. She was an older woman, probably middle-aged at the time, dressed in all black with cat ears on and her nose painted, and she gets right up on me and starts sniffing me up and down. And I back up. I am in all torn up and bloody clothes, my hair is teased, and I am in full zombie makeup. I tell her to back off and nearly trip on the root of the tree I was hiding behind. She won't stop sniffing me, so I yell for her to back off or I will hit her. This time I'm actively trying to be loud enough for someone in the scene to hear me, but I'm looking around and can't see anyone but this creepy old woman in front of me. No one comes to my rescue, and now she's started mumbling about how delicious I smell and how tasty I would be. So I yell again that she better leave before the next group comes, and this time I get the attention of a few of the other students in the scene. This time she apologizes and mutters something about thinking I was a customer, and she fades back into the woods. To this day I have no idea who this woman was or why she decided to harass me alone, other than I was by myself, but whatever it is, I know she is quite possibly still in the same town as me, and she could be harassing teenagers in the woods to this day. I'll never know. Chased by a naked man in the forest. Hey y'all, this took place in the summer of 2022, and I just never thought of writing down this story because I was so stunned that it happened to me. So every summer in my city, me and my friends like to make small campfires in chill, secluded areas because we don't want to drive an hour to an actual campsite and pay any campsite fee to do so. These also happen pretty spontaneously, so it's a nice last-minute hang to do. There's this one spot near my house that's located by a river that's really nice because no one usually goes there. The only thing to be worried about are bears, though, because living in the Pacific Northwest is challenging like that, and my house specifically is located right next to mountains and forests. So one particular night at 11 p.m., I decide to go ahead of my friends and meet them at the spot and set things up early because I want us to be chilling once they all get there. The spot I get to has a 2-minute paved walkway I have to go through, and then I have to take a small trail ramping down the right side of the bridge that crosses over the river. Along this paved walkway are 2 lamps located halfway and another at the start of the bridge / the ramp down to the campfire spot. I park my car at the beginning of the trail on the street and bring my campfire stuff like a flashlight, lighter, small firewood, a small shovel to dig out the pit, etc. I get to the spot, and it's a small sandy beach kind of embankment on the side of the river with a small waiting area for toddlers with their families during the hot summers. So I set up the chair, and I get to digging the pit with only my flashlight illuminating where I'm digging. I'm also just shoveling the sand right next to me, nowhere near the water, but all of a sudden I hear a loud splash. A splash so loud that it can only come from something equally large, like a 2-hand-sized rock. I'm confused because I swear I'm not throwing my sand into the water, even though I'm only a few feet away. I shine my flashlight at the water, and I don't see anything, so I kind of just brush it off, thinking I'm just hearing things. But as I keep shoveling a bit more, I hear another loud splash. At this point I think something is falling from above because logically something must be falling into the water. I point the flashlight above where some trees are above the river, and I don't see anything big enough to make the splash. So as I keep digging, with my heart rate kind of going at this point, I hear a rustling past the arch of where the bridge goes over the river. I quickly grab my light and shine it towards where I heard the rustling. I call out, "Hello?" No response. In my head, if it was a bear, I should be getting out of there immediately, but there was no bear, or signs of anything for that matter. So I tell myself I'm just hearing things now because I've seen horror movies before, and now my mind is playing tricks on me. But I hear the noise again, and it clearly sounds like leaves being rustled, so I shine my flashlight over to the area again, and as I focus my eyes towards the illuminated area, I see the naked back of a man hunched over. I was kind of frozen in anxiety and stress because, honestly, of all the things I was to see, I didn't think I'd see the naked back of a man. From the quick analysis my brain could muster up, he looked to be mid-40s, shaved, not bald, and medium-ish build, like a mix between chubby and built. As I had my flashlight staying on his back, he started to stand up, and the first thing I noticed was that he wasn't wearing any pants either. My next reflex was to start packing up all my crap and getting the hell out of there because now I'm piecing in my head that he must have been throwing things into the water to scare or shoo me away. So after using my reflexive deductive skills, I proceeded to speed walk out of there with all my stuff. I'm carrying all my things with me and briskly walk up the small ramp, and I'm on the paved path now out of the forest. I can feel my heart beating in my chest, and I am frequently looking back to make sure I'm not being followed. I'm in Crocs, mind you, so I'm hoping that if I have to book it out of there, I'd regret not being in sport mode from the get-go. I make it to the halfway point, and a sense of relief starts setting in knowing I made it safely out of this very scary situation. But as I check behind me for the final time, I see something. Slowly creeping over the ramp is the naked man crawling on all fours as if he were primate walking. His head was positioned towards me, looking at me as he made his way to the middle of the paved walkway. He slowly got up from his stance, started standing on his feet, and positioned his body to face me. After setting himself into his new position, the man starts running towards me. I freaking book it. I run as hard as I can down the path. My flashlight jumped out of my pocket and I lost it, but I didn't care because a whole naked-ass man was chasing me at 11 p.m. at night in a secluded forest. I looked back for a split second, and the man was still running towards me, still completely naked. He could have my flashlight for all I care. I wanted to make it out of this situation alive. I finally make it out of the forest, and I run to my car, which is only 30 feet away from the end of the forest. I desperately get to my car, and like a classic horror movie, I fumble with trying to get my key fob to unlock my car. I actually drop my keys and quickly think to myself, I'm actually dead, but I brush the thought off and pick them back up. I get my fob properly, unlock my doors, and throw my things into my backseat before getting into my car. This felt like an eternity, but in hindsight, it most likely took 6 seconds altogether. As I try to guide my key into the ignition, I am fixated on the end of the paved path that I was just at a few seconds ago, waiting to see if the naked man was coming still. I feel my key go into the ignition, and I switch my sights onto the road in front of me, and I zoom out of the area as fast as possible. As I drive away and I'm a good 30 seconds from the location of the horror that just took place, I get a call on my phone. It was my friends calling me, asking if I made it to the spot yet, and all I say to them is, guys, do I have a crazy story to tell you? They pull up to my house because, again, it was actually decently close to the campfire area, and I tell them the whole story the way that I told it just now. They swear that it was none of them trying to prank me or anything like that, and I also knew none of them would try to full sprint at me with their dong out. But as we're just talking out in front of my house, there's a college student who looks like he's walking home that's going in the direction of where I encountered the naked man. I just yelled out to him, "Yo, be careful, there's a naked guy that was chasing me by the bridge that crosses over the river." He responds, saying, "Oh damn, really? I gotta go over that bridge to go home." All I tell him is good luck, man. The next day, I reported it to the police by phone, but they sent over an officer so I could tell them in person and show them where in the area I saw these things. When we went to see where I initially saw the man's back hunched over, they said they didn't see any trace of anyone being there previously, but the officer said they would make note of it anyways in case it happens again. Some friends say it's a skinwalker, others say, more realistically, it's either a homeless, mentally ill, or drunk/high person. One theory I've heard my friends say is that it's a future version of me pulling a prank on the past version of me because honestly, when time travel is real, I would totally screw with my younger self like that. This happened about 10 years ago at a KOA campground. I was in my early 20s and on a 4-month solo cross-country road trip. I think this was in Indiana or Iowa, I cannot recall exactly. I was tired from a long day of hiking, and after I set up my tent, I was charging my laptop and using the Wi-Fi in the laundry room. I had out a map, and I was researching and planning where I would go next on my trip. I was the only person in there, and really no other tents or campers that I had seen since I arrived. An older man comes in, maybe in his 50s or 60s, and starts talking to me. I try to be polite and reciprocate his conversation, but I'm clearly into what I'm doing. I have headphones on, and I'm reading in my book and looking at the map. He comes up right behind me, looking over my shoulder at my map and book. He was so close that his body was pressed against mine in places. Although I wasn't ready to leave, I felt uncomfortable and packed up my things to get out of there and back to my tent site. I saw the same guy later that evening at a tent site not too far away from mine. He stopped to talk to me and pointed out his motorcycle, little tent, and cooking pans. I thought it was really cool that he was also traveling cross-country, but with so little he brought with him. As before, he was very friendly with me, and I was polite but a little standoffish or reserved. That night, I just had a feeling that something wasn't right. He creeped me out in the laundry room by getting too close to me, and although he was only friendly when I saw him later, I just felt like he was a little too drawn to me. Because of this creeped out feeling, I decided to sleep in my car that night instead of my tent. My plan was to get out of there as soon as I could in the morning. A little before dawn, I woke up in my car. I've slept in my car plenty of times, and it's not very comfortable, so I wake up a lot. In the early morning light, I see the same man from before, inside my tent site, right outside my tent. He was stealthily leaning towards my tent, with his ear right next to the material. It looked as though he was trying to listen inside my tent. I crouched down in my front seat so he wouldn't see me. I observed him listening outside my tent for at least a minute before he walked away. I waited until it was light outside, had my firearm and pepper spray ready, and then tore down my campsite and shoved it all in my car as fast as I could. I didn't fold up my tent or use the restroom or brush my teeth, I just dipped out of there. I don't know what his intentions were. Maybe he was just a nice, lonely man. But who does that? We were the only campers there, and the office would still be closed for some time. It was dark out, and we were alone. I'm glad I listened to my gut and that my spicy senses kicked in. I wish I had told him to back off in the laundry room the day before instead of trying to be polite. I kept my guard up the rest of my trip. I probably could have made more friends along the way, But this guy made me feel like being a loner and like I shouldn't trust anyone. I decided on a whim to drive 4 hours or so to camp along the Mississippi River in Illinois for a few days to detox from a drug habit. I had decided I'd go to the area that is managed by the Army Corps of Engineers because it's public land and free for camping. I got there, found a nice location, and started a fire. Bear in mind this isn't a campground or anything, it's just a plot of public wilderness. It started raining, so I set up camp, put out the fire, and went to bed. I awoke to some rustling around outside my tent. I looked outside, and staring at my tent was a homeless dude whose face was covered in scars, possibly some sort of skin disease. He was literally about 10 feet away from the door of my tent, and when I opened it up, he was looking right at me. It was pretty scary, but he seemed like a nice dude. We started talking for a while. It had already quit raining, and he had a fire going. It was probably about 6 o'clock in the morning at the time. He kept talking about the weirdest shit. He also kept asking me for a cigarette every 5 minutes, even though I told him every time that I don't have any and I don't smoke. He kept offering me trades, and he even offered me his elaborate hobo stove for a cigarette. He had obvious mental issues and was likely schizophrenic. He was showing me all of his animal hides, and his bicycle was covered in snake skins. He was telling me about how he'd kill things, and when he'd eat them, he would gain their strength and intelligence. He was really kind of interesting, and I enjoyed talking to him. He was teaching me about how to kill, trap, and skin dozens of different types of animals for hours. He was teaching me all sorts of survival techniques. I was honestly learning a lot of shit from him. The conversation was getting weirder and weirder. This man rambled when he talked, his train of thought was quite sporadic, and it was kind of hard to gather exactly what he was talking about, but I'm pretty confident he wasn't only talking about raping human females but animals as well. I was honestly getting really creeped out. I don't think he was actually going to hurt me, or anything. He was kind of a small, feeble guy. He actually seemed genuine, enlightened that he had a human to talk to. There's a good chance he hadn't actually had any human interaction for quite some time. We basically talked for most of the day. We shared some rice and beans, and he showed me basically what he does for the day. He showed me how he cooks, showed me how he boils his water, etc. Well, it was getting dark again, and I was thinking about his knives that he had shown me and that I really didn't want to go to sleep with him around. I told him I was going to run to town to grab some cigarettes and I'd be right back. He was thrilled. So I drove the duck away to some SHT town on the other side of the river called Clinton, Iowa. Found some casino, lost $5, and then fell asleep in a park right next to a playground. I woke up to the sound of children playing, and then I drove home. My trip was ruined. Okay, so I'm a guy, and about 11 years ago, when I was 8 years old, me and my family, mom, dad, and brother, as well as my brother's girlfriend, who was living with us at the time, went on holiday to Australia to visit some relatives on my mom's side of the family. They lived in the rural parts of Victoria, and to give a basic summary of the area, they lived on a farm. The house was surrounded by various fields. When facing the house on the left side, there were 2 fields, and then at the far end of these fields, there was a highly wooded area with a dirt track running through it. My grandparents, the relatives that lived there, would often go on nature rambles through the forest to spot the wildlife that lived within there. My mother, being a dedicated bird spotter, decides to head off with me and Lisa, my brother's girlfriend, into the forest, as we both are fascinated with wildlife. We must have been walking along the dirt track for around 10 minutes, taking pictures of the various animals we'd seen. We passed by a line of motorcycles and around 7 bikers having a barbecue. One of the bikers politely smiled at my mother, and she responded with a simple good evening. As we walked past them, one of the bikers approached us and asked where we were going. We told them, and they informed us that they had been camping in this area for around 2 nights. They told us to be careful, as people had been shooting games in the forest. These people apparently had aggressive dogs, so we were told to be careful. Around 15 minutes later, I'd spotted an old barn, which I dashed off to explore, being the adventurous child I was, while my mother and Lisa observed a bird of some kind. I didn't tell them where I was going. As I approached the barn, I saw 3 large dogs tied up outside. They were Rottweilers, and they seemed incredibly aggressive. They were on chains and barking and snarling a lot. I didn't think anything of it at the time. I assumed they were for hunting, but looking back, Rottweilers aren't hunting dogs. There was also an old mattress on the floor outside, which appeared to be covered in brown stains and emanated a foul aroma. I was around 3 feet away from the mattress, but the smell was unbelievably powerful. As I was going to turn around to return to the others, I saw a man emerging from the barn. The image of this man is one of the few things I remember clearly from this day. He was very tall, about 6 feet 4 inches, and was wearing a blue pinstripe suit. The strangest thing about him was that he was wearing a large top hat. His clothes seemed very worn, and his face, the parts of it that weren't covered by a large brown beard, were red as if he had just been working out on a hot day. I remember the man smiling and approaching me. I asked him if he was a magician, to which he said, "No, I look after doggies." "Do you like dogs?" I told him I did. This is when things started to get weird. He began to approach me and asked if I wanted to come inside and have my picture taken with the dogs. I politely refused and said my mom would be looking for me. He grabbed my hand lightly and said it would only take a second. At that point, I heard my mom shouting to the man, demanding to know what he was doing. She had come looking for me. The man simply let me go and just stared at her. She asked him again, in which he continued to just blankly stare. He didn't say a word. My mom immediately grabbed my arm, and me and Lisa walked as quickly as possible back to the entrance. We got about halfway there when I turned around and told my mother that the magician was following us. She turned around, and, sure enough, he was power walking behind us. My mom screamed at him and asked what he wanted. He didn't reply again, he simply continued power walking toward us. At that point, my mom began walking even faster, to the point that she was dragging me along. The next part of the story is mostly a blur to me. I remember my mom gasping, picking me up, and sprinting full pelt with me while screaming for help. My mom tells me that the man had begun running toward us and managed to grab my leg. She said that Lisa jumped on the man's back and scratched all across his face before he threw her on the floor. My mom apparently kicked the man in the testicles, grabbed Lisa off the ground, and ran with me over her shoulder. I remember we slowed down shortly afterwards and stopped to catch our breath. We continued walking over for the magician to show up again from the brush area. My mom began to panic and started running with me again. The man was sprinting after us. We were nearing the area where the bikers were camping, and my mom screamed for help. 2 bikers emerged from the trees nearby, and my mom screamed, "That man tried to kidnap my son." The magician turned around and immediately bolted in the other direction. One of the bikers pursued him, but unfortunately, the magician had a head start. I remember the bikers were incredibly nice, and I soon forgot about the strange man after one of the bikers let me sit up front on his motorcycle while my mom and Lisa went in the side car. The guy took us into the nearest town and dropped us off at the police station, where my mom filed a report. After that, he gave us all a lift back home, which was really nice. I never got to thank him at the time, as I didn't really understand the situation. I live in a tiny town, so I've never felt unsafe being alone or anything like that. Over the summer I had started getting into the habit of going on walks as a way to get some easy exercise in and listen to a long podcast I had just started. The issue is that I hate crossing streets and feel like I'm being judged or watched by people in cars when I wait at crosswalks. I'm a paranoid person, so I started going on walks at night when fewer people were out and about. Since it was summer, it didn't get dark until around 9 p.m., so I'd walk from usually 10 p.m. to 12 a.m. When I first started, I didn't have a solid walking path and would wander down random streets just for the fun of it until I looped back around and found my way home. But after about a month, I settled on a path that I'd usually loop twice to get 7 to 8 miles in. It took me across a few bridges and main streets, but mostly neighbors with minimal street lamps and a couple parking lots. I used to avoid some busier streets. It was around maybe the 2-month mark that I started feeling paranoid. Mind you, like I mentioned, I'm a paranoid guy. I always assume someone's watching me on the street, in the store, or through a window. I think it comes from worrying people can look at me and somehow know I'm trans, but So when I started feeling like I was being watched on my night walks, I assumed the paranoia I usually feel finally caught up to my walks and I'd just have to get used to it. But this time my paranoia was actually grounded when I started to notice what looked like the same guy almost every night, walking my path at the same time, but always a street or two ahead of me. Because he was ahead of me and not behind me, I sometimes felt like I was the creepy one following him, but I had been on this path for a few months now, so I knew that wasn't the case obviously. But for a bit, I was worried this guy thought I was following him. After maybe a week or two of me feeling like I was total creep for walking my path, it blew up in my face in a pretty small way but caused me to feel totally freaked out. This night he was ahead of me as usual but took a turn I don't take, so I lost him for a couple of streets. I didn't think much of it and continued on, but decided to divert from my own normal path and stop at a store to grab a drink. I don't do this too often because I had a habit of buying snacks I didn't need, so I stopped going and hadn't at all in the last month. After going in and wandering for a bit, so I didn't feel like I was wasting my walking time by not walking, I noticed the guy who had seen the past 2 weeks also in the store. I knew it was him because he always wore this puffy blue coat that seemed too heavy for the temperature and one of those blue medical masks everyone bought in bulk in 2020. Didn't think much of it other than, hey, there's that guy I've been following that's funny. After wandering a bit more, I got my drink and left, having to take some darker streets I normally don't because of where the store was. I immediately noticed this guy is behind me and walking way too close for my liking because I distinctly remember not seeing him buy anything or even hold anything earlier. My paranoia is going crazy, so I start picking up the pace a bit and turning down my headphone volume because I usually have it on max, and when I do, I hear he's calling out to me. Saying stuff like "Wait up little lady and can't you just stop for a second?" I was so taken aback by being mistreated for the first time in forever that I did stop. I pass really well and rarely get mistaken for a woman, but at that time I was letting my hair grow out a bit so I could now see how in the dark I could look like a girl, and at the time I was 17 but honestly looked younger. So now I'm standing there, ucking flabbergasted, because I just got called little lady when I'm neither of those things, and he kind of jogs on up to me and asks why I was ignoring him. I told him, sorry, my headphones were loud. What do you want? And he immediately backs away because I have a deep-ass voice. My testosterone shots had blessed me with a voice deeper than most of my cis male friends, so it throws this guy off, and he's looking at me weird instead of responding. He mumbled something about thinking I was someone else and sorry about the mistake before walking off. It wasn't until the next day did I really sit down and connect the dots of what had happened and what had almost happened. I took a week break from my night's walks, and when I started again, he was nowhere to be seen. And since I never saw his face and barely spoke to him, there was really nothing to report to anyone, so I just let it go. My wife and I and our dog were hiking near the Continental Divide outside of La Garcia, Colorado. The trail we decided to hike was very secluded, and the parking lot would be difficult to get to without a Jeep or an SUV. When we pulled up, there was only one other car in the lot, a newer, say, 2020-ish BMW sedan. I commented to my wife that it must have been very difficult to get that car up here, and we were both in shock that it made it up the dirt path. We start the hike and see a man who's a little off the path, heading in our direction. I figure it must be the man who drove the BMW up the path, and I approach him to ask how in the world he went that car up that road. As I approach the man, he's surprised to see us but doesn't appear to be super nervous or anxious. I notice right away he's carrying 2-day packs, and he smells like he hasn't showered in weeks. We get to talking, and the man, oddly handsome, has a very heavy Midwest Amish accent. He tells me he grew up in Amish and is originally from Ohio, and that while he was hiking he found an abandoned campsite. He proceeded to tell me that he decided to burn both the tent and the abandoned sleeping bag but kept the backpack since it was easy to carry down and still in decent shape. This man was very nice and chatty and even apologized for smelling bad, saying that he hadn't showered in a couple of days. We said our goodbyes and said nice to meet you, and we all headed our own ways. I looked at my wife, and in that moment we agreed it was weird but thought nothing of it. Once we completed our hike and got back to our car, we were talking and realized he never mentioned his name when asked or explained how he got the car up there, which was my initial question. He would just deflect and steer the conversation to something else. Not sure what to do in this situation, and on the hike we never came across this abandoned, burned campsite. I am not an avid camper, so I am wondering, is this normal camper etiquette? Should I call the state troopers? So later, I went into the office and reported the incident. I passed it on to the USFS. I talked with a park ranger as well. He informed me that they had a suicide reported there a few months back, but they had been up there and retrieved all of the man's gear. They also had a missing person claim a few years back and ended up finding the guy, but not his stuff. They said they would call in a few days if they needed any additional information. I live in Australia. In the southeast of Australia lies the state of Victoria, and in that state lies the high country, an extremely vast and remote expanse of alpine mountains and valleys that's largely only accessible by 4WD and can take days to get in and out. The place is popular with forwarders, deer hunters, and hikers. We 4WD, and this was the destination chosen to go camping for a few days with my partner, Jess, and me. Some time away from the world beyond the reach of mobile phones. The 4WD was loaded up, lists double-checked, vehicle maintenance done, fuel loaded onto the roof racks, the police station closest to our destination notified of our trip. It's common for people to notify them as a safety measure, especially when not traveling in a convoy. Again, very remote, and off we went. We were headed to a place called the Wanangata Valley, a remote valley deep in the high country, a huge amphitheater-type valley with alpine mountains rising high in every direction and a river running along the valley floor. Towards the end of the first full day of driving, we finally made our way down the last track for the day, skirting the ridge and arriving at the valley floor as the sun dipped below the mountains. We found a secluded spot to pitch our tent, nestled in amongst the eucalyptus trees by the river bank. It was midweek and off-season, so we were the only ones in the valley that we knew of. After setting up camp and having a meal by the fire as the sun went down, we snuggled together in our sleeping bags, and in short order, we decided to hit the hay. At some point in the night, I woke to a loud noise. I wasn't quite sure what I heard, so from inside our tent I listened, but nothing. I must be going mad. No sooner had I thought it, I heard another noise. It sounded like something falling off our camp table and hitting the ground. I put it down to possums or wombats fossicking about, common in the area, and nothing to worry about. I should have packed up after dinner, I thought, and I went back to sleep. Sunrise came, and we slowly woke up. Needing to pee, I opened the tent and jumped out. Looking around, something just came over me, a chill. It wasn't the way we'd left it. Instead of seeing two chairs together by the fire where we were sitting, one of them was by the table, and on the table was a loaf of bread that I'd swear I packed away again the night before. I walked over to the table to inspect. A half-eaten piece of bread was sitting there, with a very obvious chomp mark taken out of it. I flung the tent open and asked, "Were you up before me? Did you have some bread?" "No," was the answer. Jess got up, and together we went through all our stuff. Nothing was missing. As we went to check the 4WD, I noticed the footprints. There were a bunch of them around the front of the car where the hood was. Most of the camp was covered in grass. This was one of only a few spots that was just dirt. Had someone tried to open it? Very distinct footprints, not mine or my partner's. Perhaps they'd already been there? These camping spots are used intermittently, and obviously we weren't looking at the ground when we arrived the night before, with the sun setting. I don't think either of us wanted to actually admit what we were both thinking, that someone had been creeping about our campsite in the night, far from civilization. We discussed if a possum could have made the bite marks, argued about if one of us had left the bread out, and eventually discussed moving on and camping somewhere else. After much deliberation we decided to stay. I had the rifle in the 4WD, which I guess gave me an overinflated sense of safety. Which, in hindsight, was a very poor choice. As the day rolled on, the sun shining, and with nothing eventful happening, I decided to walk across the valley floor, an open field of subalpine grassland, about 800 meters to an old ruin of an isolated homestead built by settlers who ran cattle in the valley some 100 years ago. It's steeped in mystery. There's an old, unsolved multiple murder from 1917 that always captivates people. I read the plaque, took some photos, and started wandering back to the camp. As I neared the halfway mark back to camp, I noticed Jess walking across the field toward me. She must have gotten bored, I thought. As she approached, it was clear she was in a panic. Immediately, she started to tell me how she went down to the river bank to wash the pots and pans, and as she looked up, she saw someone over on the other side of the river, watching her from deep in the forest. I had no reason whatsoever not to believe her. I asked what he looked like and got told an old man, 70s or thereabouts, scraggly looking and in old tattered clothes. Apparently the second she looked up, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the impenetrable bush. I couldn't comprehend it. How was anyone out here without a 4WD or a dirt bike, and how would anyone get to that side of the bank without first crossing over from our side? There's days worth of damn near impossible to walk through bush on the other side just to get to where my partner saw him. We decided to jump in the 4WD and drive along the length of the valley, checking the dozen or so riverside camping spots as we went. I wanted to spot a camp, have my partner ID the guy, and make sure he wasn't creeping, with our theory being that he may have been a hunter, off in the bush after a deer. After making our way up and down the valley and not seeing anything, we drove back to camp at a loss to explain anything. As the sun started to set and with my partner, and I, quite shaken, I grabbed the rifle and sat it next to us as we cooked dinner and chatted, having a few drinks to settle the nerves. Had we been spooked? Was it just that there's a lot of mystery surrounding the valley and the homestead murders? We talked a bit and settled into a good footwarming in front of the fire. At some point, Jess needed to go to the toilet. I was asked to come with her to the spot behind a tree where we placed the portable toilet, about 50 meters from camp. Considering everything that had gone on, it was a no-brainer. Jess did her business, and we turned around and came around the side of the tree, and that's when we saw him. Standing at our camp, about a meter from the rifle I had sitting against the table, was a man. Old, check, scraggly looking, check, tattered old clothes, check. Jess squeezed my arm so hard I thought it was going to come off. Everything about her body language screamed, this is the same man. As we got closer, I could make out more odd things about him. He had part of a deer antler in his hand that looked like he'd been whittling away at it, and what looked like antler pieces carved to plug large holes in his ears, like stretchers, but made of bone. The same goes for the bone-looking buttons on his ratty old coat. He wore old leather shoes that looked homemade. "G'day, mate," he said. "Foo hash k me, mate, you gave us a foo hash king heart attack," I said, officially shaking bricks. "Where have you come from, mate? Everything is alright." "Just over yonder. You lot aren't hunting around here, are you?" Looking directly at the rifle. "We might, yeah, why?" "There's no hunting around here, not enough deer as it is." "Well, we hadn't decided on it, probably packing up anyway," I said as I edged my way towards the rifle. "I should put this away anyway, I didn't mean to spook you, mate," I said, looking for an excuse to get that rifle into my hands. "It's all good, guns don't spoil me," he said. I didn't imagine they would. I picked the rifle up by the barrel and held it like a walking stick in an attempt to be non-confrontational, breathing a sigh of relief. "No offense, but you caught us a bit by surprise. You gotta be the only one we've seen since we got here." "Yeah, I saw you come in last night, I fuck-hashing bet you did. I've been coming up here for 40 years, a beautiful spot, isn't it? It takes a bit to get down into the valley, hey." "Yeah, mate, look, no offense, but we are going to hit the sack soon. Do you need a lift back to your camp?" "No, all good. Just out for a wander before I tuck in for the night. Saw the fire and thought I'd say g'day. Anyway, I'd better be on my way." And with that he tuned and walked off, parallel to the river, into the dark, no torch. That was officially enough to spook us beyond any ability to calm down, and we decided to pack up in the dark and head out, even if driving in the dark was a monumentally stupid idea in this part of the high country. We got into the 4WD and drove out, taking us along the valley floor. We didn't see a single fire, a camp, a vehicle, or anything. We kept on driving. Halfway home, Jess, bored from the drive, flipped on the camera. No memory card. After getting home and telling a few people what happened, a friend's dad, an avid bushman himself, was the one to officially freak us the hell out. "Oh, you met the button man. Then what now?" I said. "The button man, he's an old bushman who goes out into the high country for months at a time, hunts with a spear, appears out of nowhere, scares people, and has buttons made out of bone. There's a heap of people gone missing up that way. The cops keep looking but can't find a single trace. Campers. Hikers. One camp was found burned to the ground and a car left abandoned. They can't find any evidence at all. A quick Google confirmed it, the missing people, the button man, the lack of evidence. Police set out into the bush and found his camp. They spoke with the man but had nothing else to go on. We don't camp that valley anymore, hell, we don't camp that side of the high country anymore. Anyway, that's our story of how we met the button man." Back in the summer of 2015, my friend Kate and I were coming home from a trip with her parents to a resort town in the mountains famous for skiing for a couple of days. The highway to get there wasn't too bad as it had some significant upgrades for a big athletic contest our city had hosted a couple of years prior. However, it still cut through some relatively remote terrain, and it's not uncommon to see deer and bears on the side. Her parents wanted to go hike up to a lake near the highway between the town and the larger city where we lived for a swim, so we pulled off the road and parked in a small parking lot. This was not an official swimming lake, and a logging company used the parking lot, so although we were allowed to be there, there was no one else in the lot, and it is not well known. So we all pile out of the car and start figuring out what we needed to throw in our backpacks for the hike and swim, as we had not planned this when we had left our rental. Out of the corner of our eyes, we notice a man come walking out of the woods on a small dirt road that's snaking away from the logging camp and our intended hiking area. He comes up to the car and starts to explain that he had been up the road cleaning up a campsite he and his friends had been staying at, and even though where they were camping was illegal, he wanted to come back after and make sure it's clean. Unfortunately, after cleaning up, his battery had died, and could we drive up the road to the campsite and jump just in for him? He says he doesn't want to call for CAA as we were in a pretty deserted area of the highway, and he doesn't want to get in trouble for camping illegally. There was something extremely odd about him and his mannerisms to me. However, I can't exactly explain why. But from being a reasonably attractive female in my mid-20s and dealing with creepy guys often enough, all of my instincts were yelling at me not to follow this man into the woods. I remember that he was oddly specific about the make and model of his car that had broken down, repeating it multiple times, and that it was only a minute or two drive down the dirt road. Kate's parents are amicable and agree right away to go and give him a jump. Without waiting, he states that he will meet us at the car and points down the road, saying again that it's only a 2 to 3 minute walk down that road. However, being raised on cold case files and Law and Order SVU marathons, I did not want to get into the car or go into the woods. Not wanting to make a scene, I suggest that Kate and I walk over to the small bridge we had crossed to enter the parking lot and take some photos. So she and I walk over there, and I start freaking out and telling her that something felt off and I didn't like what was going on. I begin texting another friend, telling him where we are and that if I stopped texting him to call the police and tell them what was happening. Cell phone service in that area was super spotty. I was just praying that he would be getting my messages, because all the hair on the back of my neck was standing on end at this point. Meanwhile, her parents had gotten back into their vehicle and had driven down the dirt road to find the car. About 5 minutes later, we hear their car honking. They had gone down the road slowly, and they haven't seen the man, the car, or the campsite. There was no trace of anyone. We see her parents' car back up down the dirt road and then drive down another road, honking again. Her parents went up and down a couple of small dirt roads for maybe another 5 minutes trying to find the man and his dead car, but they couldn't find him, and he never responded to their honks. At this point, Kate and I are getting very agitated by the strange circumstances and just want her parents to come back. When they do, I flat out state that I am highly uncomfortable with what just happened and did not want to continue with our planned hike into the woods. They were spooked too and agreed to get out of the area, and we ended up stopping a while further down the highway at a much more popular provincial lake. I have no idea what was going on that day or what would have happened if Kate and I had gotten into the car to go with her parents, but I feel seriously lucky that we didn't find out. The creepy kid at day camp. I have autism and ADHD. So my parents would send me to day camps for kids with disabilities. I hated camp. I would have rather been spending my summer with my grandma. I went to a different camp every year when I was between the ages of 7 and 11. Anyway, I went to this camp when I was 11. So that was the last one I went to. Now on to the story. So there was this one boy that would always pick on me. He would always try to take my cat stuffed animal that I always carried around with me. I know what you're thinking, why would I still be carrying around stuffed animals at 11 years old? Well, it was more of a comfort thing because I get nervous and scared at times, plus I have autism. So my cat would make me feel better. I don't carry it around now, of course, because I'm 23 now. I stopped carrying my cat around when I was 14. But I still have my stuffed cat. Please don't judge me. Anyway, he would say your cat doesn't like you, he wants to go home with me. Another time he purposely stepped on my headphones I had for my CD player. You see, I sometimes would listen to music when I was upset or stressed out. I still use CD players and collect CDs, by the way. The camp counselors were okay with me listening to music. Anyway, when he did that, he would say, "Oh, I'm sorry," while laughing. My grandma got me a new pair of headphones since I told her what happened. My grandma felt like going to the camp and talking to the camp counselors, but she didn't. Another time he broke my Brad Paisley CD on purpose. I didn't let him touch it, he just grabbed it out of my hand. He threw it on the floor and stepped on it. I was crying at that point. I loved that CD after all. One of the nice camp counselors came over and asked what happened. I told her, and she had a talk with him and gave him a timeout. After that, he came over and said he was sorry. He also pushed me sometimes or threw stuff at me. I don't know why they didn't just kick him out of camp. I mean, disability or not, that's no excuse to act like that. He seems like a bully. There was another thing he did that I never told anyone until now, that is. Out of all the things he did, this was the worst. The other things I just said were just the tip of the iceberg, if you know what I mean by that. One time when I was changing in the bathroom after we all went swimming, he came in the girls' bathroom and was trying to watch me change when I was in the stall. I saw him trying to look through the stall door. I was the only one in the bathroom at the time. I screamed, "What the hell are you doing in here? This is the girls' bathroom." He just stormed out of there. I was thinking about telling one of the counselors, but I was too scared and in shock. Looking back on it now, I should have said something. Man, what a creep. So creepy kid from day camp, let's never ever meet again. What did you guys think about all this? Let me know your thoughts. Back in 2016, my friends and I, for the longest time, had been itching to go camping to our local camping site in the Los Padres National Park in Southern California. When we found the perfect weekend to go to that didn't interfere with any of our work schedules, we set the date. 3 days before the trip, we found out we were going to get hit by the El Niño rainstorm. Us, being the type of dudes that we are, didn't care if we got hit by the storm while camping. So we packed up our cars and made the 45-minute drive to the campsite. The campsite was a family-friendly one, where there were about 100 camping lots that circled around the clearing in the forest. We found the perfect spot that was underneath huge, thick trees that would help block as much rain as possible, and it worked out that the restrooms were only 30 yards away. As soon as we got to our spot, we took advantage of the afternoon sky being cleared for the moment, and we rushed to set up our spot. The layout that we used was that we pitched our tents close by, where our tent doors were only 6 feet apart. The reason why we did this is because, in order to combat the rain, I brought a 30-foot by 30-foot thick blue canopy tarp that I threw over to cover us from the rain above and from the rain that would be running through the ground. It was a genius move on my part. But whenever you would walk around our tent, you would be making so much noise from crunching the plastic tarp. Hours passed, and we were all around the campfire. It was late into the evening, and this was the first time that I noticed that there were barely any other campers. They were mainly camping in their RVs like the fake campers they were. In my honest opinion, they were the smart ones, unlike my friends and me, who were sleeping in 2 small tents, with our only protection being the blue tarp. I was getting tired from a long day of work, and I decided that I was going off to knock out. My friends followed my lead as well. The way that the sleeping arrangements were was that I had my friend Ray sleeping in my tent, and AJ and S were sleeping in theirs. Before I called it a night, I whispered to Ray and told him, "I'm going to prank call S and AJ, but I'm not going to say anything." Ray smiled as I dialed my friends up. I called them on restricted, and S's phone started to ring off. Both of them, being the way that they are, got timid very easily as they said to one another, "Who's calling you this late in the night?" "I don't know, they called me on restricted." "Are you going to answer?" "Of course not." Ray and I were holding in our laughter as they ignored our call. I decided to do it one more time. Once their phones started to ring, they started to freak out once again, and they said, "Who is it this time?" "Same person, I think." "I'm going to answer." As they did answer, S said in a very shaking tone, "Hello?" Ray and I had to hold in our laughter as we kept as quiet as possible, not wanting to make any noises that would give off that it was us. I held the phone close to my mouth as I began to breathe heavily in a murderous way. I ended the call, and just hearing them freak out the way they did was making my night even funnier. Me being the idiot that I am, I called them one more time, and this time, S picked up the phone immediately and said in a tough voice, "Look. Whoever this is, better stop. I am about to call the cops if you keep on calling. This is not a threat." Ray and I looked at one another as we, at the same time, began to fake moan so loud and immediately started to bawl out in laughter. AJ and S were so mad at us for pulling this prank on us that they were cursing us out. Me, finally calming down from laughing so loudly, told the boys, "Good night. I will have pancakes ready in the morning." Since I fell asleep relatively easily, I was out in a matter of minutes, while Ray, AJ, and S were up for a while longer. I was the first of my friends to wake up in the morning, and as I promised, I had the pancakes already cooking by the time that anyone else woke up. The smell of me cooking woke up my friends, and one by one, they got out of their tents. As we were eating, AJ spoke up and said, "Hey Jay, the prank that you pulled last night went a little too far. Yeah, you had us ready to run to our car and take off." Me, feeling a bit guilty, apologized and said, "Sorry guys, my bad." "Yeah, it's one thing to prank call us like that, but then to walk around our tent and then go inside it in the middle of the night is totally out of limits," S said. Me, not knowing what they were talking about, said, "What do you guys mean? Come on." Still with the jokes. "You were the one that was walking around our tent, and you walked in." Ray spoke up and said, "That wasn't Jay who was walking around. I thought that was you two getting your revenge on us for scaring you. That wasn't us doing that. It was you two." So to explain, after I fell asleep, about an hour had passed where Ray, S, and AJ were still up and all was quiet in the forest until the sounds of footsteps were heard stepping on our blue tarp that was on the ground. At first, my friends thought that it could have been just a forest animal wandering around, but the heavy footsteps were a dead giveaway that it was a person. As they described, the person was walking all around our tents, making constant figure eights. The person would place their fingers on the tent's fabric walls to run them up and down. The footsteps finally stopped after a couple of minutes, right in between our tent doors. The three of them were already having their hearts pounding out of their chests. It was silent for a long minute until the sound of the tent's zipper being slid open. As AJ says, the tent's door was only open halfway, but it was too dark to see anything clearly. But in the darkness, both S and AJ saw the silhouette of a man's face pop his head into the tent to look at both of them. AJ and S faked being asleep the entire time, but they kept their eyes locked onto the man. The man then opened the tent fully and walked inside the tent, just standing at the entrance. The man didn't say a word or do anything, he just watched the both of them lying in their sleeping bags. After their longest minute ever, The man just took his steps out of the tent, and his footsteps were heard walking away, disappearing into the night. The entire time that this was happening, S and AJ thought that it was either me or Ray doing this, and Ray believed that it was AJ or S doing this. Back to us arguing back and forth at the breakfast table, we were interrupted by a man walking to our campsite, and he said, "Good morning, boys. How did the four of you sleep last night?" This man spoke in a smoker's voice as if he had been doing that for all of his 45 years of being alive. He wore a dirty, sweat-stained white t-shirt that looked more gray at this point, and his blue jeans looked as if they had never been taken off from his pants. He smelt like liquor, not a good sign at 8 in the morning, and his words were just mumbling around. We didn't say a word to this guy, as he then asked us if we had any cigarettes to spare him. I said that we didn't smoke, and he said, "Oh, well, if you boys want to visit me in my RV, just stop by any time." The man continued to walk away, towards the restrooms, and as he was done using them, he walked back to our campsite. He didn't say anything this time, but he looked at us and gave us a nearly toothless smile, and he walked back to his RV. I took note of his RV, as it was the only RV that stuck out as being dirty and more rundown than the others. We quickly summed up the man as the person who was walking around our tents last night, and S and AJ now remembered that they smelt liquor from the person who was standing in their tent. We all agreed that we would keep an extra eye out on this guy, and if he did spend another night, we would most likely report him to the park rangers if he tried anything else. When it was around lunchtime now, the man came back, not to use the restroom but just to talk to us. "So, are any of you boys interested in buying an RV? You all can go check it out right now and see if you want to buy it. I don't need it anymore since my wife left me. Just check out the inside of the RV." "No, we are good, sir," I said it with a visible, threatening tone. The man seemed to notice this, and he walked away. The man did end up leaving a few hours before sunset, but the entire time that he was there, he kept glancing at us. The man had his RV about 50 yards away from us, and I noticed that he had a restroom right next to his RV. Why did he make an effort in walking all the way over to our campsite to use our restroom? Also, why did he even use ours if RVs come with restrooms installed in them? Whatever the man wanted, we were just glad that we were about to enjoy the rest of our weekend.